And at the beginning of it all, we have the unruly son of Edhoth Taylor. A high-ranking noble family reigns supreme at the academy, but our protagonist, upon reading the letter, learns that, in short, they are removing him from the family register. He says it seems the god of destiny is mocking him, and he is Edhoth Taylor, and his life is over. He is thrown out of the house and told that all his belongings are gone, thanking him for his hard work all this time. Everyone on the street starts staring at Ed, but everyone tries to look away so he doesn't notice. One of them asks what the point is of walking on eggshells around him now, since apparently he was disinherited and even emptied his dorm room. Some people are even happy not to see him next semester, saying he shouldn't have cheated on the entrance exam in the first place, calling him a nobleman, saying they knew this would happen. The protagonist thinks this is genuinely unfair because the arrogant Edhoth Taylor they're talking about isn't him, and he's desperate, so he entered a game based at the Sylvania Academy of Magic, and it's his favorite game, the failed swordsman of the Sylvania family. Normally, when you enter a game in webtoons, you have the firstborn son of an important family, a brilliant young clan master, a rule-breaking SSS level hunter character, and of all possibilities, he's a third-rate villain who gets kicked out of the dormitories at the beginning of the game. Edhoth Taylor. He has the worst character at the worst time, and he starts yelling that this isn't fair, because they can't be serious. After all, he's always lived frugally, having a simple life without greed, and so he tells them to look at him, because he's saying this is all unfair. After everything he's done, noticing that he's being economical and simple, he calls him a scoundrel, shameless, and the protagonist doesn't even have a way to refute this. But then he looks in a mirror, seeing his own status, seeing that the numbers there are low. Furthermore, he says that the reason Edhoth Taylor is the worst starts now, because those statistics can't be true. After all, even a farmer NPC had a stamina of 5, and he was studying magic, but his intellect is crawling on the ground, and that stamina is too low, even for a nobleman. And it's no wonder, because he was originally just a third-rate villain who appears in the first scenarios, and even in his memory, he's basically a fool, and he can't even remember what happened to him later. But he ends up remembering at the moment, because in the corner of the end credits, he was begging, looking like a damn vagrant in the streets, and he thinks it's no surprise, because the thug who knew nothing about that world was suddenly thrown into the streets. And he's still lucky to be alive, and the protagonist almost falls apart when he learns what his future is. But then he questions why it was him. How does he possess this body? And he doesn't know the reason for it, nor can he find out. But he won't let that be his end, thinking that he will succeed no matter what happens. And so, instead of a school, he says that the academy is closer to being a city, with the entire Arkan Mountain as its headquarters. In this place, it is located in the northeast of the academy, the first Underdeviled, and he was trying to escape the prying eyes of the students and ended up walking for half a day. And that's quite a long time to understand the situation he's in. And the moment Ed was simply rejected was the extreme initial part of the scenario. And fortunately, despite being rejected by his family, he hadn't yet been expelled from school. And that's extremely important because in the setting, Sylvania Academy is a top-tier academy, and as long as you graduate, you have a secure future guaranteed. And as long as the game is set in the academy, it can make the most of the information from a player 5 times dedicated to the game. And that means that if he graduates quietly, he can live a more comfortable, more incredible life than the one he left behind in the past world. So obviously his goal is graduation. But the issue now is the enormous tuition fees, and this semester must already be paid. So if he gets a scholarship for the next one, it will work out. But with his statistics, he questions whether he can even get the scholarship. He thinks he'd be lucky to just avoid failing, and he tells himself he can think about the tuition later. But first he has to think about an urgent matter, the things he needs to survive now: shelter, clothes, and food. He opens his suitcase, noticing that around next week he can avoid becoming an Injongo, as he has flashy clothes, a ceremonial dagger, an ornamental cup, and other things. He says he has enough clothes. As for food and shelter, he thinks the problem is that he has nowhere to stay, nor food to eat that night. Given his reputation, it will be difficult to find a job, and he can't go back to the dormitory where he was expelled. So he thinks he's stuck there in the forest for now, but he's glad there's at least a stream nearby. After all, he can still manage. He has 10 days until the start of classes, so he says he'll get himself ready to attend school. He begins by using the wind blade time after time, and finally manages to cut some wood. He's happy that Ed can use magic, but he says it's fascinating because he's seriously exhausted after cutting only 15 tree trunks. He thinks it only made him hungrier, and he thinks it's not that useful. At least he ate before they kicked him out. But he wonders if you get hungry when you use magic, and he's very hungry. He says he remembered something his grandfather told him when he was young, because when the barley hump appeared when he was a boy, he said he ate tree bark in the mountains. So he looks at those trees and uses ignition, making a tree soup, and he claims that anything edible is good for him, thinking that if you don't look closely, it looks like chicken breast. My friend, anything looks like chicken when you're hungry. Ask the guys who've eaten those weird creatures. Everything tastes like chicken. I'm still skeptical about this stuff, and so he throws that piece of wood it down, but the taste is horrible, and he starts vomiting, but still, he needs to eat to survive, and already on day 3, he starts saying he hates it. Your grandfather, and after starving for a day and vomiting for a while, he came to the conclusion that wood should be used for building dwellings. And first it is necessary to raise the frame that supports the wood, and he only has 2 hands, but there are for after that. And he thinks that this really is not an easy job, and ends up falling to the ground with all that wood on top of him. But he gets up once again and manages to make the frame of a tent, somewhat primitive, but he manages to keep it's standing, and he says that the structure of the shelter is finally ready. But there is still a lot to do. After all, he can't sleep on the uncovered ground, and he thinks it's kind of a waste. But it's not like he had a choice, throwing all his clothes around to have somewhere to sleep. And as night falls, he manages to make shelter, and in the morning, he finally manages to cover his shelter, barely managing to finish. And when he looks up, it is said that his creation is complete, and his proficiency in crafting has increased, and the new project is complete, basic wooden shelter. And he also gains the classification of novice craftsman without any specialty. But his maneuverability is at level 4. The protagonist has level 1 design and level 1 gathering skill, and notices that this is also the crafting system appearing. He thinks that Ed lived his life as a nobleman, so perhaps he didn't know. But he's more talented with his hands than with magic. The protagonist is happy that his dexterity is at level 4, and he thinks that at this moment, he needs this practicality as his crafting is nearing completion. He manages to get a simple harpoon and says that now he's going to get something proper to eat, as he's been on an empty stomach for 2 days, and the excessive physical work is wearing him down. He definitely shouldn't be able to move now, and yet, it must be desperation that keeps him moving. He continues saying he wants meat, finally getting some fish, using the ignition, cooking them, and preparing to throw them inside. Then there's a week left until the start of classes, and he just has to endure as he is now. If he can hold on until then, he can get through school without too many problems. But in that, someone arrives calling him, and the protagonist looks back before throwing the fish back in, startled by the person. He says he was so focused on surviving that he forgot something important, and a girl recognizes Ed Taylor. He talks about the main characters, but of all the people, he didn't expect to run into her there. He remembers when she was punishing him because he showed no remorse, telling him to disappear from that academy. That's Princess Phinia, and she asks if he hasn't left yet. She's the one who expelled Ed Taylor from the dormitories. Then the protagonist says that Ed Taylor is a villain who appears as soon as you start the game. Using his noble status, he makes advances towards the protagonist's childhood friend, only to end up being punished. But it doesn't stop there with a vengeful heart. Ed maliciously manipulates the protagonist's entrance exam for Sylvania Academy. However, he is then caught by a girl who came to take the exam while hiding her identity, Phinia Alice Coyle, the 3rd princess from the Empire. Coyle, the Princess of Phoenicia, activates insight, detecting the lies and conspiracies of the target, and Ed Taylor, who was caught in a pitiful state, laughs. Edh of Taylor, after making excuses and constantly deceiving himself, had all his lies exposed by Phinia's insight, resulting in his expulsion from the dormitories. While everyone at the academy may hate Ed Taylor, he's run into someone you shouldn't. She asks him what he's doing there, questioning if he's saying the academy isn't expelling him. Ed tells her he's still a student, but he was expelled from the dormitories. She says it will be brief, telling him to leave, stating she can't stand seeing such a shameless person at the school. She'll speak to the academic department and personally request his expulsion for the crime of committing a dishonorable act as a student and for framing a classmate to block their path to a better future. The protagonist can only think about how his precious food is burning after 3 days of starvation. While burnt food is a problem, this is a life crisis in many ways in this person. The Princess of Phoenicia truly possesses the power too. He's trying to get her expelled. And since that's the case, he goes after her, saying that the sun will set soon, asking if royalty isn't always protected by heavily armed soldiers, and to think that a noble princess would arrive alone in such an isolated forest, looking very suspicious. But she says that if he's trying to threaten her, knowing she has no escort, then he'll regret it. He questions how she's threatening him, saying he's simply trying to thank the princess. Then her insight is activated, and she questions him about his gratitude. And it turns out to be true, with her ability telling her there's no lie in Ed Taylor's words. She doesn't understand anything, and so the protagonist says she seems surprised. The Taylor family, to which Ed belongs, is famous and influential, but using that name to exploit citizens and conduct human experiments to research eternal life, to the protagonist, is a trash family destined to be destroyed, and the family members will all be imprisoned or executed. However, he was disinherited, and he may be cold and hungry now, but it's still better than dying. And in the long run, that's very good. But while he fails, he manages a new creation, the burnt fish that cannot be consumed. And the protagonist says that then he needs to convince Phoenicia, no lies, or else he will be expelled, or rather, it would be game over. And looking at the timeline, around the time Ed Taylor was expelled, Now it must be about a week before the start of classes, so he questions what the princess's reason for being there would be, and he says that coming there without any escort and in simple clothes means that she must be completing the class placement test. And it's the placement test for Professor Glass's class. It's a test to find magical pearls hidden in the forest, and he says that Professor Glass's test is known for being a bit perverse. And of course, if it's the noble princess of Fuenia, they'll be measuring the best class, which would be Class A, and she asks if he's trying to flatter her, saying that he hasn't changed a bit, and as expected she should ask for the academy to expel her right now. But the protagonist says that without his help, she will never be able to enter Class A, and if his words are a lie, then he expels her, saying that if she goes to the lake in the southeast of the forest, there will be a small grassy island, and then there will be a giant tree in the middle of that island. And this tree is called Marilda's guardian tree, and there she will find the gift he left. She then finds the pearl he said would be there, and she thinks to herself that the Ed from 3 days ago was definitely a lying charlatan. She still vividly remembers that lamentable state, but the Ed from just now was different. But she just kept thinking about it, and it's said that the class placement test has officially ended, with Glass telling them to retrieve the pearls they acquired. Everyone brings a bunch of pearls, some giant, some even eyes of some creature. I think there's a renegade over there, and this guy is holding a bunch of Dragon Balls. I'm going crazy, and if I'm not mistaken, what the girl is holding is the Eye of Sauron. He says they will all start in Class F, and it's said that it's important. Observing the examiner's intention in a test, this test isn't just about finding any magic pearl. He says that only those who find pearls with low magical power will reach Class A, and only 3 of them found this type of pearl: Ziggs, Lortel, and finally, the one who found a pearl from Marilda's guardian tree, which had extraordinarily high magical power. She who found the hidden pearl will be at the top of this class, Princess Fuenia. Meanwhile, the protagonist is very sad because his fish burned and he no longer has the strength to use his spear. Now it's time for some serious fishing, and he puts a worm in to make fishing easier. He says that the 3rd princess of the empire, Fuenia, Elias Cole, since she was young, has seen through flattery and sophistry, sharpening her vision, which led to the creation of her innate ability. No one can hide her insight, and as such, there was no choice but to give her authentic information. But this also leads to an even bigger problem, and the reason why the proud Princess Fuenia will come to be called the Princess of Love is that after facing failure during the leveling test, falling to Class F, she would then begin to change. However, if Fuenia, who has a great influence in the initial scenario, finds the golden pearl and enters Class A, the scenario of the original story would collapse. And even if he manages to avoid being expelled, all the information he possesses would become useless, and he thinks it will be over. But of course, the future cannot change, and the one who ends up at the top of the class is Lucy Myro, not the princess. And she keeps thinking to herself that insight will always be the truth. However, she thinks she really did have a pearl, and Edhoff Taylor didn't lie. Although it's not a gift in the first place, he wonders why Princess Fuenia hid her identity. She was ashamed of the special treatment she would receive if her identity were revealed, and she wanted to prove it to herself. Just by seeing the pearl, she knew it would yield the best results. In the test, Fuenia couldn't take that pearl. After all, obtaining it would be something she hadn't accomplished alone, and it also held the title of Princess of Love that she would receive in the future. It's not a skill or attribute, but a title she would earn by walking the path of the righteous. And he says he baited the princess, saying she'll never be able to get into Class A, and if his words are lies, then she can expel him. Whether it was true or false probably didn't matter. The princess could always discern which was which. Even though Edhoff Taylor truly believed the princess would fail the test, she was confident she would succeed and rub it in his face. However, Ed wasn't lying, and since she didn't get into Class A, the princess now thinks she'll keep an eye on him. She couldn't stand doing nothing anymore, and while she's totally frustrated, the protagonist is calmly fishing for a little fish to throw something inside. After a while, he says he might be living in a place where he has to start running early in the morning to get to school on time, but he's still back at the Sylvania Academy, and inside, he's saying the school's opening ceremony is about to begin now, and it's good to see that the students have progressed before starting that new semester, saying that they should enjoy the prepared food while it lasts. And while everyone goes to the table to get some food, the protagonist says that he could hear the 2 whispers that welcomed him, the one that had survived, and then one of them tells him to look at Ed, with the girl asking how he had the courage to come to the opening ceremony, asking if he really intends to continue attending there. But the protagonist is eating calmly, and he says that this is the reward for the winner, and he will enjoy it slowly, and he has already eaten several plates, piling them up beside him. And people are surprised to see Ed Hoftler there, and the protagonist continues thinking that the goal is graduation, and a girl wonders if he is the second year, who showed a lamentable state during the entrance exam, and says that if you look closely he seems a little different because he certainly eats in a very polite way, and the protagonist says that he has no ambition and only wants to graduate. However, a girl there he stands observing the protagonist and thinks it's strange because somehow he looks like a different person, even though the protagonist wished that nothing would happen until the end of that school year. My friend, it's true, the more you ask for peace, the more things will derail in every direction. And then the first day of classes arrives at the Sylvania Academy, and it's announced that it's a new semester, and they are excited to see the students in a new and improved way, and to see the work that has been done by the Sylvania Academic Society. And the protagonist says that on the very first day he was almost expelled, and he didn't expect the protagonist to tell the rector about him, although from the way that grumpy old man was talking with a smile on his face, it doesn't seem like she said anything bad, and in any case, he almost couldn't avoid it. But that way he thinks. He'll be careful so that the story doesn't stray from the original, and he acquires a combat skill from the novice fighter, which is the archery proficiency, level 1 specialty, and he talks about the enhanced life skills for survival and proper magical training by a student of the Faculty of Magic. And he can easily kill a rabbit using a bow. And he says that to get the best out of the combination of the two, there's no better weapon than that a bow. And as his life skills become more proficient, and he becomes able to create good quality arrows, he will be able to infuse spiritual formulas and spells into the arrows. Although of course spiritual formulas are out of the question, but then he looks ahead and sees a girl sitting right in that tree. And he is surprised to see Janica Failover, and she is a sophomore, the best in her class, the genius spiritual sorcerer. And the girl looks at him, saying that he is the funny guy Mariela was talking about, and tells him his name is Ed Hoff Taylor, introducing herself to him, saying that Ed can just call her Janica, and he questions when she arrived there, because she approached too quickly, and the girl asked if he is surprised that she knows about him. And she says that forest is the territory of Marielda, a high-ranking spirit. He has heard a lot about him and her. And the protagonist is surprised that the master of the forest spoke about him, and she says that Mariela is kind of being nosy and attentive everywhere. It's obvious she would know about an unwanted visitor. The protagonist is surprised to be called an unwanted visitor, and notices he killed many of those rabbits and cut down many trees, becoming frightened by this. However, the girl tells him not to worry about small things, as it's the natural order of forest creatures to hunt and eat each other, and Marielda isn't bothered by such a thing. The protagonist says he thinks even a huge wild wolf has a tender heart, but he tries to look away while the girl keeps staring at him. The girl finds this unexpected and says she has something she wants to show him, asking if it isn't simply cute and adorable. She shows a glow in her hand and says she signed the contract with it yesterday. As soon as she hears this, she asks if the protagonist wants to try touching it. He wonders about the contract, asking if it's a spirit and if he wants to be friends with Janica. He just needs to intervene at the right time, but he says he doesn't know. What she means is that she doesn't see spirits, or rather, he can't. And the girl is surprised by that, and he says yes, turning around, saying that anyway, he went there to get food. So now go ahead, and he says that only by following the original plot will he be able to gain a formative advantage, because Janica Failovia is someone who has significant importance in the original plot, because she is someone he should never get close to, because the girl has apparently changed a bit, and she looks at him in a rather strange way, and she remembers when he talked about a huge wild wolf with a tender heart, and she says that it's exactly as Marielda said. He really is a fascinating guy, because no matter how much she thinks about it, she thinks he really can't see her, asking who he is, and also saying that she tried to be very kind to him, but he only changed her mind with a yes, and playing what that yes should mean, throwing herself on top of that huge wolf, saying that it's not like they won't see each other again, and from now on, she can find out. And after a while, the protagonist says that the distance between her shelter and the student area wasn't close at all, and he barely arrives on time, leaving at dawn and rushing at full speed. And just by going to school, he's doing something ridiculous that his stats are improving, and someone is watching him from the corner of his eye. He says that if he wants to win the scholarship, he'll have to study harder. Apparently, the one watching was Janica herself, who is paying close attention to the protagonist. He says he writes on a stone slab using burnt twigs and borrows books from the library. On his way home, he washes his sweaty clothes from daily use, and Janica continues to watch him. He wonders if they'll drive by tomorrow morning. The protagonist says you'd think he'd finish the next day, but no, he has to check if he has enough firewood, drinking water, and dried meat for lunch tomorrow. He wonders why the meat looks so suspicious while he tries to eat it, and says he can only sleep for 4 hours because of it. The girl continues to watch him, but he says that's not what bothers him most. He asks her how long Janica will continue following him, and she's surprised he knew. He says it would be stranger if she didn't. He realizes, trying to pretend to be an aggressive guy, asking if she doesn't know who he is, saying he's Ed Hoff Taylor, the worst bandit in existence, asking why she keeps following him. But she says that's the judgment other people make of him, smiling at the boy, saying she still doesn't know him, and he sees that there's nothing he can do, thinking that it really is. Janica Failover was that kind of character, and she may seem naive and silly on the outside, but she has an independent mind. However, knowing what's in store for her in the future, he simply can't answer her with a refreshing smile on his face, because Janica is the final voice of the first act, and she's the only character who smiles at Edhoff Taylor, and he says he didn't want to go this far. But in this case, since fate has brought them together, he asks if she can do him a favor, and the girl gets all excited, and he says that as you can see, he's a mess, he was rejected by his family, and he's in a difficult situation, asking if she can give him some money, and the girl is paralyzed with shock. He explains that it's not as if he won't pay her back, asking how much she has. He says that every year, Jania wins a scholarship for being the best in her class, but that doesn't just mean she's excellent. Her background is so poor that without the scholarship, she can't enroll or even graduate from school. Jania, the daughter of a small farm, has a weakness for money, and so the girl apologizes to him. The protagonist thinks Jania has been eliminated, and so, 3 days later, he says he doesn't feel good about it, but he doesn't want to get involved with important characters anymore. So, he wants to be careful that the story doesn't deviate from the original. As he returns home, trying to enter his tent, he gets a fright, questioning what the hell that is, and he says that in terms of importance, she is a character with an even more striking presence than Janica, and the object of admiration from her colleagues, and even teachers, the rare genius and the most powerful character of the failed swordsman from Sylvania, Lucy Merrill. My friend, this is going to be a mess. If the federal police come knocking and that girl sees you inside your tent, I think you're already in enough trouble. And then the girl gets up and he questions why on earth she's sleeping there and what she's doing in that mountain valley, thinking about the original plot and that he should be careful. And Meryl says that he's too noisy and can't sleep. He questions what he did, but she says no, he's that wolf over there that's the size of a house. And he continues talking to him, and the wolf is actually trying to talk to the protagonist. And when Eddie looks back, the girl says that he's asking him to save Janica at all costs someday. My friend, I've already told you, the more you try to run away from the plot, the more the plot will come after you. You've got the burden of a gigantic wolf on your back to show you how unlucky you are. But even with the girl saying something like that, the protagonist says he can't see anything with his own eyes, because he can't see spirits, and she's pointing at nothing. He also says that he thought he had finally gotten rid of her in the forest, asking why she's sleeping there, and she starts talking again as she falls asleep. But the protagonist tells her not to go back to sleep. However, he thinks of something, noticing that she is small, but has the ability to jump like a kangaroo, meaning her range is like that of a stray cat. And whether it's on top of a clock tower or on a rooftop, it's always a good, sunny place to take a nap, and she can go wherever she wants. And their camp is in the forest north of Arkan Island, deep in the woods where nobody comes. But it's not difficult for her to access, and it's even nice. With a cool breeze and the sound of a running stream, it's the perfect place for her to take a nap, and he's starting to think he deserved it. And so, the next day, he thinks he needs to do something about it, because she's casting dozens of advanced spells and even flying in her sleep. And if she stays there, it's only a matter of time before the original plot is distorted. Sometime later, he completes another production and manages to create a trap. The girl asks if she can eat the dried meat, and the protagonist tells her not to, but she takes it anyway. It's clear they can't understand each other at all, and she's already returned twice. He's sure she'll come back again, and he decides he needs to do something about it urgently, because surely among all the traps he knows, there's one that can defeat Lucy, and there was no way to defeat her. But he has another plan, and he says that, thinking about it, the maids of Artful Castle were looking for her there. The girl is shocked, almost turning pale, saying she suddenly remembered something urgent. Then she runs away and flies with a super jump. The protagonist thinks that really there was no way to beat Lucy, but there was information in the book that everyone ignored, and he thinks it actually worked. It says that Lucy hates the dormitory maids who take care of her like mothers, and she runs away from them every day. Lucy Marrow finally got rid of her, and Lucy has only been in this camp for 2 days. And this won't lead to anything, or so he thought. But it didn't take him long to realize that this thought was very complacent. And so the joint combat training begins. And he explains that joint combat training is literally a simulation of individual combat exercises, and to minimize lethality as much as possible. Combat students primarily use weapons of strength, and even students from the magic department are only allowed to use basic elemental magic. Students from the alchemy department are also prohibited from using potions or very powerful spells. And following randomly drawn keys, which mix different years, they compete. And above all, in that class, all the important characters who play a significant role in the plot are participating. The benevolent Princess Wanya, the Golden Daughter, Lortel, the Crescent Spear, Gixu, and the spiritual sorceress, Janica, along with the lazy Lucy and the melancholic Clebius, and he could go on and the list would never end. And yet, the most important person after all is the protagonist, the failed swordsman Taylor, and Taylor's match is next, and he gets all excited, saying he already knows the results, so he didn't pay much attention to the matches because the winners of the duels in the joint combat training episode were first-year students the same year as the protagonist, except for one person, Jania, a second-year student. He doesn't believe she's happily running towards him after the pathetic experience of him asking her for money. She then tells him that the match list has already been released, and unlike Lucy, who's a cat person, she doubts Jania is a dog person. He says he's really not interested and hasn't tried to talk to her, but she asks why, questioning if he's curious to know who his partner is. He's surprised to remember something, noticing that Edith Taylor was expelled from the original story. He wonders who his opponent will be, and only now does he realize it. Edith Taylor versus Fonya Elias Clo, the Fonya princess. He then says that the students mentioned below must complete the practical preparations are underway, and he heads to the waiting room. The fight will be between Lucy Marrow and Taylor McClory, and the protagonist is drooling over Taylor in action. He says he will perform to the best of his abilities, and the protagonist thinks that at this moment it doesn't matter who he's fighting. He needs to pay attention to Taylor. Although he's from a world beyond the screen, he's lived as Taylor for a long time, and from bad, miserable, and futile endings to true endings that left incredible and lasting impressions. He's completed this journey countless times. Among the numerous routes, there wasn't a single one that wasn't arduous and difficult. He's decided to take care of his own life, but he's rooting for Taylor. And by the way, he hears the announcement, and the guy on the megaphone repeats it again, calling Lucy Marrow and asking her to please come to the arena when she's ready for the practice match. The protagonist wonders where Lucy went, and he ends up seeing her lying under the reserve podium, sleeping. He tells her to get up because it's her turn, pulling the girl's cheek, and says that if the fight is canceled like that, it will be a big problem. It's an important episode where Taylor wields a sword for the first time, but the girl only says she's hungry, asking if he doesn't have any dried meat. But the protagonist tells her to finish her duel first, and the girl actually goes there, very sleepy. She's a freshman, the best in her class. Lucy Marrow versus Taylor McClory, who will face the girl using brass knuckles. The protagonist says that the protagonist of this world, born to be a swordsman, has never held a sword before in his life. Even so, with the first strike of his sword, he cuts Lucy's quick magic. Hearing that she thought she was obviously going to hit him, it was blocked, catching her off guard. This while Taylor closes the distance, and surprisingly, Lucy hits him with lightning, an intermediate level electrical magic, and Taylor is then completely dominated by the magical spell cast by. In a reflexive manner, Lucy is disqualified for using intermediate level magic, giving Taylor the honor of being the first to defeat Lucy Marrow. He declares this a legendary scene, and so the match begins. He charges forward with his brass knuckles, but the girl simply casts an ice spell, pinning him to the wall and easily defeating him. The protagonist is completely bewildered, and the girl acts as if she doesn't even want to be there, casting some random spell to defeat some nobody. Everyone finds it strange that it's already over, thinking that it's impossible to beat the best in the class. Taylor is left lying on the ground, and they even say it's not surprising, because what's the point of attacking a mage like her with bare hands? The protagonist explains that Taylor McLaurin's life has always been a series of trials. A country bumpkin, a failing student, a low-achieving student who hasn't gotten a single decent grade since he started studying, a failure that no one has acknowledged. Then he picks up the sword, and the protagonist says that while everyone jumped to conclusions about the match, in a completely perverse situation where they felt sorry for him, even amidst all this despair, Taylor never lost hope. The protagonist confirms that he can do it, telling Taylor to go for it. The boy gets up and charges at Lucy, shouting her name, and the girl is startled. The protagonist thinks he's amazing, and he says that's where Lucy will use her lightning magic. But he realizes something is wrong, because a wind magic appears at the tip of the boy's sword, and that wind magic accumulates right at the tip of Taylor's sword, pushing him back. But Taylor ends up being deflected by the magic, which looks like a dragon, coming from that whirlwind of wind and throwing the boy far away with a whirlwind. And he's stunned up there on the bleachers, and the protagonist doesn't even see him go by because of that speed. And he falls hard after being thrown far away, and the protagonist says it's not lightning magic, but a wind magic, and Lucy succeeded. She throws him far away with just that, crowning herself the winner of that duel. And the protagonist sees that Taylor is defeated and hopeless in the corner, and he is surprised that the protagonist lost. My friend, but the protagonist's disappointed face isn't as big as mine, because I really thought the protagonist was going to be a total loser, but he's not that bad at all. The girl threw him away like a mosquito, and Eddie can hardly believe Taylor lost, and he leaves the arena with his tail between his legs. He thinks this is going to be a big problem, and effectively they can't leave him alone. Then he remembers the wind protection, which automatically protects protects against sudden attacks using the power of the wind spirit. And the protagonist says it's a continuous magic obtained through contracting with the high-class wind spirit Merilda. Then the protagonist runs past Lucy, and she asks if he can give her some dried meat now, but he doesn't even pay attention to her. Then he says that according to the scenario, Merilda and Lucy are originally to separate entities, and because Lucy came to his side, he ended up creating a contract with Merilda, making her stronger because of it. And so it's said that the next training session will be. The fight will be between Eddie, Ralph Taylor, and the respective Foam princess, Alice Chloe. She speaks to Eddie, explaining that last time, whatever happened, he doesn't care, saying Taylor had to win. He ran off, saying he had to win by grabbing the sword and gaining confidence, but in the end, he lost because of Eddie Ralph Taylor's presence in Sylvania. So he goes to call the boy, and he says he doesn't know if it makes any sense, but it's better than standing still. He tells Taylor that his efforts will definitely pay off, telling him not to feel so down, that there's nothing to be ashamed of, and that if Taylor's heart is completely broken, there's a good chance he'll be forced to work hard in the end. The protagonist then tells him to walk proudly because he did well, and that his opponent wasn't a good match for him, telling him not to let something like that bring him down. The protagonist thinks there will be many other difficulties at the academy, and Taylor should be the one to face them. That's right, and not Eddie himself. Some time ago, His Majesty told Phoenicia that she was born with God's blessings, and Eddie says that the first person to discover her innate discernment was Emperor Chloe. Her ability wasn't something given by a god and insight, and the life of royalty is full of endless intrigues and conspiracies. Within this dark abyss, she herself developed this sense as a means of self-protection, and that's why Princess Phenia can have confidence and certainty in her ability. And there was a horrible chasm in the eyes of the imperial family who admired Phenia, and even when she saw through them, the Princess of Love lived as if she didn't know. And the protagonist returns to Phenia asking her to go easy on him, and he thinks to himself that Phenia had no other alternative but to face the person directly, and she agrees to this, asking him to go easy on her too. But everyone in the stands knows how the protagonist yelled at the Taylor, saying that he is really persistent, with them thinking that he was making fun of someone who wasn't even capable of doing anything, thinking that he probably wanted to seem like a nice guy, rooting for the person he was messing with, and they find that disturbing, imagining that he was that kind of person from the beginning, and Phenia thinks her words are correct because Ed Hoff Taylor used his position to embarrass his juniors, and when it didn't work out the way he wanted, he was caught altering the test results, and that was shameful. In the past, he would still be like that for sure, but she remembers everything that has happened lately, and she wonders if that's all there is to it, because previously that desperation was real, and that's what her ability told her. Then the combat between the two begins, and she tells Ed that he confuses her, saying that she wants to reach a conclusion with that duel, and says that she is still invoking her first magic, and she remembers that the magic that Ed Hoff Taylor can use is wind and fire, questioning how the boy will react to this, forget everything, exchange encounters, or a dramatic battle with a grand finale, to be able to rid himself of this mysterious man from his heart. But the protagonist is simply hit by that magic. The girl doesn't understand anything, and he is hit and thrown to the ground, saying that he lost. But Foyne questions what he said. Then she notices that he didn't even block after seeing the trajectory of the water ball, and everyone starts laughing, saying that he is worse than Taylor because he was acting well, but was knocked out with just one blow. And they start telling the princess that she was very nice and that it was refreshing. And the protagonist says that it was a good fight and he learned a lot. Then she questions what exactly he is, but ends up noticing that this man, now that she thinks about it, after arriving on stage, he didn't even make eye contact with her once. And so they say that Princess Foyne is the winner, and she wonders if he wasn't interested in this duel in the first place. But the protagonist questions whether it's really time to duel now, because upon encountering Princess Foyne, it's best to act cautiously, not letting the situation affect him, because Princess Foyne is an important person in this world. But the person more important than Princess Foyne is the protagonist of this world, Taylor. He asks where that kid went, but then someone calls him, and it's the princess herself, questioning what he's doing there without an escort. She asks what he's really upset about, and he says he doesn't know what she's talking about. If she's talking about the duel, he learned a lot, but she questions how he learned a lot, since he didn't even intend to win in the first place. He was only thinking about how to get off that stage quickly, and she says she's already having trouble keeping up with the classes. But that slime merchant is only thinking of ways to take control of the school, and Professor Gleick's bad manners aren't improving, and all the time the servants are always talking about royal customs, and she says she's had enough on her mind. Oh, she's had enough, hasn't she? To see how the neighbor's grass is always taller, the guy is living in the woods, eating fish, bathing in the river, washing clothes in the river, and having to travel at least 200 kilometers to get to school. But it's you who has the problem, and she questions him about who he. To further complicate things for her, he questions what she's talking about, wondering if she really had so much repressed frustration. But then the protagonist touches her, telling the princess to take a deep breath and please calm down, saying there's no need to be so nervous, telling her to breathe, and so she does, calming down a little, questioning what just happened, asking him to please forget all that shyness. The protagonist asks if he can leave now, getting away from this crazy woman, and she says that's exactly it. She has a bad habit, and she can only ask questions bluntly, but she feels like she's constantly trying to guess and predict what's going on in their thoughts. And probably because she's lived so long in the palace, the protagonist can't stand her bothering him anymore, asking him to let her go first because he needs to find Taylor. And she says that's why she's going to ask bluntly, asking if he tried to cut ties with her family because she knew a dark side to them, asking if the reason he bothered Taylor was because he needed a reason to be kicked out of the family. The protagonist thinks this is a fairly accurate deduction, although almost entirely wrong, and the idea of the Rob Taylor family having a dark side was correct. However, he says he doesn't know what she's talking about and that it's something she'll investigate in the distant future, and it's too early now. But she says she can't be wrong, as it logically doesn't make sense. Then, questioning what those words were that he shouted at Taylor, and why he's supporting and rooting for the person he was trying to kick out in the first place. She questions if he's ever felt antipathy towards Taylor. The protagonist thinks to himself that these are sharp questions, but he doesn't care, saying it's because he just wanted to mock him, and since everyone hates him, if he roots for Taylor, people might see him in a different light, something like that. She says anyone can tell that he's lying, telling her to look him in the eyes and tell him directly, because Insight can see through the lies, but he keeps saying he's telling the truth, and his nose just keeps growing, pointing out the lie, and she gets really angry with him while he says it's true. But Insight says it's a lie time after time, and he thinks she probably doesn't have evidence yet, and says it's really true, and the girl keeps freaking out. And he thinks that above all, sticking with the original scenario is his only hope, and she agrees, saying that everything is fine, saying that she can't say anything now because she doesn't have proof, saying that the protagonist can go, saying that he's been looking at the door since the beginning, noticing that he must have something urgent to resolve, and he actually just leaves, thanking her. As he opens the door, he notices that it's the first time Phineas has shown this side of herself, and as someone who wants to affect the main plot, she's already involved, recounting people and events enough to give him a headache, and it's probably his fault for being a new addition to the plot. And Ed goes back to talking to her, asking how his burdens could compare to the burden which the princess carries, and perhaps it's a little inconvenient, but she really does look exhausted, and it's important to pay attention to the complicated politics. But Shesh also needs to relax a little because that place isn't like the palace, where she has to worry about everything, and this is Sylvania Academy. The protagonist thinks to himself that Phineas has lived her whole life, trying to see through everyone's lies, but this is the first time someone has seen through her. With that, the protagonist manages to leave, thinking that this is problematic because he wasted a lot of time, and if Taylor gives up, his comfortable life, or rather, this whole world, could end. He runs to Taylor, who is sitting, holding that broken sword, but upon reaching him, he wonders what he should say. Then a girl tells the protagonist not to come any closer, and he is surprised to see her there. She tells Edhoff Taylor, telling him not to bother Taylor anymore, and she is the Eliatrix, the main heroine. Taylor gets up, noticing that the protagonist is still at the school, and Edhoff is surprised that he has revived, remembering that he has a fighting spirit that never wavers, no matter how strong his opponent is. He steps in front of Edhoff, while he thinks that Taylor has a clearly evident willpower in his eyes, and he finally understands. While he was dueling with the princess, his childhood friend and greatest cheerleader, Ayla 3, ran out the door immediately without looking back, telling him that he can overcome this to this time, and that he has always been excellent at it, saying that he can do it, telling Taylor not to be discouraged by this, and Taylor asks why he is there, questioning if Ed has some business with him. Then the protagonist says that with Ayla by his side, Taylor will rise again and again, and he says that he is great with the sword, and he saw that again. Then Taylor asks what he is planning, and the protagonist thinks that's it, and he has seen many experiences with Taylor, and was with him until the end. Then the boy says that there is nothing like that, and the protagonist then decides to be honest, because he thought he would save the world, so he just had to. He was preoccupied with surviving, and he treated it as an easy task since he was the protagonist of the game and would do all the hard work for him. But now he's very relieved, not because the story, which deviated from the original, is back on track, but because Taylor, with whom he's been for so long, is still okay, and that's all he needs. The two are left behind, confused, questioning what the hell he's doing and why he's acting so cool. The protagonist thinks he can't avoid it, leaving as if nothing happened. But something happens. A huge burst of fire comes from those arenas, and he wonders if it's time. Because originally, everyone should have witnessed it while seated in the Nile building. There's literally a dinosaur in the middle of the arena, along with another mage using ice, and that's the fight between the Golden Daughter, Lortel, and the spiritual sorceress, Janica, and she's using fire magic to break all that ice that the girl put in the arena. And the protagonist says that although he is in a different way from the original, he is sure that Taylor and Ayla are watching the scene. The protagonist tells Taylor to keep her eyes wide open, because one of the numerous trials approaching him, the final boss of the first episode is her, Janica, and all those absurd spells she's unleashing. They congratulate Janica, saying she was the only one in her year to beat the new students, that she has a great personality and is excellent at spiritual magic. They ask what Janica is bad at, and she just thanks them. But then, amidst everyone, she hears that the patient is passing by, ordering them to clear a path, and Lortel is completely exhausted. While they say that Janica is his pride according to Estes, the girl doesn't like this at all, almost freaking out. The protagonist says that, unlike the original, Lucy defeated Taylor, and everything ended with the main character of the combat training being Janica, who became the protector of the pride of the previously enrolled students. Janica already had many friends, but this incident will make things even more complicated. Her movements are frantic, and he ends up thinking it might be for the best, since he won't see her on camera anymore. When he gets involved with the main characters, his mind starts racing. 2 weeks have passed since the joint combat training, and without the main characters, he can dedicate himself to his studies and survival without worry. He has a fishing net, so the food problem is somewhat solved. Besides all his stats, which are starting to improve from all the running, he wonders if it's because his stamina attributes are increasing as he feels his body is improving. But it's still too early to get lazy. However, while he's showering, Janica is there watching everything like a stalker, blushing. She asks if he likes being naked, but he questions what the hell she's talking about after suddenly appearing there, saying she just got back from fishing. He asks what's so good about that place that she keeps coming back, and she says it's like a top secret base, so she feels like the adventurous girl, and this is exciting. Says she wanted to talk to him a little more and also needs some advice. The protagonist finds it strange, wondering why him of all people, and she says he left early at that time, so he may not have seen her. But in last month's combat training, she ended up hurting someone, and the protagonist wonders if her opponent used an intermediate level spell. Even though intermediate level magic wasn't allowed, he thinks that wouldn't be important to the kind-hearted Janica. So she says she's still trying to forget, but maybe she overreacted. However, she can't shake the thought that she reacted too much, and the protagonist misunderstands. The girl asks if he should apologize to her, even though her friends try to stop her, saying she made the first mistake. She wants to do it, and the protagonist simply tells her to do it. So, if she thinks it's the right thing to do, considering that the adorable and cheerful second-year student Jania was a treasure to everyone, precious in every way, then if she ever felt guilty or self-critical, everyone would step forward to encourage her and stand by her side. But Janica knew that although it's good when someone protects you, no matter what, even if something happens, it doesn't erase the mistakes that were made, and that's probably why she went to him. She says that this was expected of Ed, since he never unconditionally sides with her. The protagonist says he can't do anything if it offends her, and she says no. That he's misunderstanding, saying she's not offended at all. She thinks to herself that this guy isn't the kind of guy he was last year. Jania might be a cheerful and smiling girl, but she was just as observant as anyone else. And even when he asked for money during difficult times, he didn't show the desperation people usually feel in such situations. This boy was indirectly telling her not to get close, but she likes these sides of Ed, saying that she actually finds it reassuring, wishing everyone in the world were like Ed. She thinks to herself that being with him brings a strange comfort. Night falls, and the next day, the protagonist goes to the gym, thinking that this is. One problem is that the failed swordsman of Sylvania is considered a masterpiece, but few people have seen its ending, especially newcomers, who have encountered several bad endings right at the beginning. For example, if he saves a girl during a kobold ambush in the class's placement test, she will witness the secret of the Golden Daughter, and she will then send someone to kidnap Taylor. And just like that, he dies with the bad ending, where Taylor is murdered. And in the Train Your Monster episode, if you ignore his childhood friend Ayla and form a group with the Golden Daughter, he ends up dead with the bad ending, where Ayla dies falling off a cliff. This is because Taylor was supposed to rescue Ayla, who fell off the cliff. And if you protect the Golden Daughter from the fire spirit Tarkin, summoned by Janica, he dies burned. So I think it's best not to get involved with this Golden Daughter, because that girl is incredibly unlucky, and besides being unlucky, she's also kind of crazy. However, this golden daughter, she's talking to the protagonist, questioning if he's listening, and he thinks he has to run because she's right in front of him. Eddie asks how long she'll keep following him, and she says she didn't think he'd grit his teeth and ignore her for so long. He says of course she'll grit her teeth and he'll ignore her, asking if that isn't obvious. Since the fourth heroine, the failed swordsman from Sylvania, the only daughter of the business magnate El Kelshin, is right in front of him. Loretta is Kelshin, the golden daughter, and she says she'd like to buy 2 hours of his time. The protagonist can only think that she's also known as the destroyer of noobs, and Eddie explains that Loretta is designated as a hidden heroine, and unlike Fenia, Loretta was treated as a villain from the beginning, and her true face was only revealed in the second half of the story. At the moment when they began to understand the loneliness and anguish of the realistic Loretta, the players found themselves at a crossroads between Fenia and Loretta. And then she talks to Eddie, but he says he can't fall for her words right now. Leaving the girl behind without further ado, he says that if he throws himself at her, as Loretta intends, he'll lose the initiative. She then asks if he can at least listen to her, saying he only wants to help her a little. The protagonist continues on, keeping a distant mountain at bay, and tells her not to say things she doesn't want to say. She questions how he can say that, knowing the respect she has for him. She says that seeing him is a great inspiration to her, because even under such difficult circumstances, he continues to learn. Of course, his arrogance and egocentrism aren't exactly new, but who cares? She asks him to please listen to her offer first, and she'll give him 3 gold coins as a down payment. He was quite close to the veteran Janica in those days, asking if he could help her befriend her. The protagonist thinks about those 3 gold coins because for some, they represent a whole month's worth of money, but he wonders if the great golden daughter. She also buys connections with money, and she tells him to keep it for now, because she's aware that the more people on her side, the better. She notices that this girl, she intuitively realized this, that she would be in a political struggle with Princess Fuania for control of the academy, and that she should start gaining allies. From now on, he says of course, saying that they will join her in this, and extends his hand to her, but the girl has a very cunning look on her face. She thinks that for people who have been rich all their lives, a moment of poverty is enough to crush their hearts, but surprisingly, for these people who face such difficulties, a small coin tends to become their ruin, and they end up selling their families, their pride, even themselves, for a gold coin. Attacking the desperate is very easy and simple, but unfortunately, that's how it should have been. The protagonist returns the 3 gold coins to her, and she thinks that's interesting. While he leaves, and the protagonist thinks that if he had taken that, it could have made things easier for him. And although it's a shame, he can't even imagine the horrors he would have gone through if he had remained trapped between the destroyer of Nobis and Janica, and he has to avoid at all cost anything that increases the chance of a change in the original plot. And that night, Loretta and Kelshin didn't feel humiliated by Ed's evident rejection, and so she went to Janica, and understanding the pros and cons, the profit, and her own self-interest. The perfect businesswoman doesn't miss any opportunity within her reach, and she says she didn't expect to see the girl there. Then Janica is surprised that it's Loretta, saying that she looks very different with her hair down, and the protagonist thinks the opposite, and this awakened the ruthless spirit within her to transform Janica Filovia into one of her allies. Loretta asks if Janica knew about the big commotion regarding her use of intermediate weapons, which was prohibited during the joint combat exercise, and it's been a while. She wanted to apologize when she had the chance. She just wanted to see the coincidental outcome. She was the best student in the second year, but Janica realizes she's wounded and hasn't healed yet. Loretta thinks she paid a high price for it to learn how strong she was, and says she's sure it will heal quickly, telling the girl not to worry too much. She thinks Janica is similar to the main characters of fairy tales, and it would be easier to manipulate her if Shesh used her guilt against her. But then Jania says she thinks her conversation with Eddie went well, and the girl gets scared, asking Jania what she's talking about so suddenly. Jania says she tells them to hold back when it comes to other people's personal matters, but the spirits certainly love conversations, and that many spirits around the girl are taking care of everything that happens to everyone. She says she hears most of the conversations in the northern part of the forest, and she saw everything when Loretto was talking to the protagonist. She questions whether she means she knows, and she knows very well that Loretto offered the protagonist money to help her befriend Jania. She tells the girl that she knows what they say, and she can't buy sincerity with money. Jania says that for her, Eddie's approach is a little more touching, asking if she acted too presumptuously about herself, and since it's her first time being a veteran, she should. She's been bragging a bit, which is embarrassing, and Loretto thinks she'll need to change her assessment of her. She says she's going now, explaining that a lot of preparation is needed to secure a high-level contract, and lately, she's been receiving much more support, so she has to work even harder. She wonders about Janica being similar to the main characters in fairy tales, and she completely misunderstood that, because a person who is in other worlds isn't like that either. Janica says everything's alright for Loretto, apologizing for the other day, as she was quite hurt because of her. Loretto thinks that despite being fully aware of the dark side of the world, she still maintains her cheerful personality. Janica says she hopes she gets better soon, and when she leaves, the girl is quite bothered, thinking that this is difficult. But even now, she strangely seems to be at her limit. Inside, Janica talks to herself, saying she has to try harder because it's so good. When people expect good things from you, and the next day, at the protagonist house, all of his clothes are hanging up, and Lucio arrives and says they stink, blowing up all his clothes. He says he just hung them up, but then someone arrives asking who's there. It's the senior maid from the best dormitory in Sylvania, the Aphilas Hall, Belly Maya, and she's the maid who kicked him out. The protagonist tries to talk to her, but Belly says she knows he's staying there because Janica talks a lot about him, but she didn't know he was living in that state. He can't even say anything because he's living in a little hut made of leaves. She says she's happy to see it was a good change for him, and he complained to whom exactly, thinking Belly's words had gone from one ear to the other, because he couldn't stop looking at that basket. And the maids of the Aphilas Hall are an elite group of women who perform all the domestic tasks perfectly, including feeding the students, and inside that basket must be the finest ingredients, which that elite maid collected in the forest. And that is information of high quality about food gathering, which he cannot obtain from books and wants to see, wondering if there's any event that Belly Maya could use to impact the main plot. She tells him that there's no need to be so respectful, saying he can talk to her like he did while living in Aphilas, but he denies it. And she's surprised. He questions, how could he underestimate a maid who is always working so hard? He mentions that in the only event where Belly Maya had a direct impact on the main plot, he talks about that basket and thinks to himself that there shouldn't be any problem with them, extra characters, becoming friends. Then he listens to Belly Maya's explanation of various edible fruits, mushrooms, and herbs, and thus his creation is complete, the installation of fish farming nets. He says he has plenty of meat and fish, and his food needs are almost met. He then uses Ignite on what he's using as a cauldron. His fire magic reaches level 10, and his wind magic also reaches level 10. He says he still only has to basic spells, but he's used them so many times that he's reached his desired level 10 proficiency without even realizing it, and he manages to make herbal tea in his. He mentions a chalice, and says that using them to chop wood or cook drastically increases his survival rate. And proof of this is that he finished his work, and yet the sound hasn't started. And to be honest, he must admit that he's having a little fun. But then, when he looks at the sky, he sees a shooting star, and he doesn't understand anything. He says that until now, everything was going well, and that star falls near the protagonist, taking him with it. He questions what the hell this is, because his precious camp is gone, and that thing in the sky says that it almost killed him, and he sees that it's Lucia, who destroyed everything there. How could that be? The guy was chilling, living the good life, relaxed, enjoying nature in peace, and then this devil comes along to ruin his peace, as if it were nothing. Calmly, she destroyed everything, threw the guy high into the air, ruining his day. And when she says that it almost killed her, the protagonist questions whether it almost killed her, seeing the way he is. And she is the most powerful mage in the world. So who could have done that? And the girl says it was Belima, and the protagonist wonders if she isn't a good person. And she says that she just killed Araula, as she always does. But she was in a bad mood for some reason. Then she came at him with the bread, slamming it shut more forcefully than usual. And she thinks it seems like something is bothering her, but it's not her fault. And she says she was so regretful that she simply teleported out of there because she thought it would hurt. And just because of that, she ended up destroying the protagonist house. And he gets really pissed off, thinking about himself and Belima, and the girl asks if he has any dried meat. And he tells her that she ruined everything, questioning what kind of life she's living. And he's got a twitch in the girl, and she ends up feeling pain from it, and asks him if she's not using any protective magic, and she says that her magic is exhausted. So he's surprised she says that. And the girl is also surprised he says that. So he says that this is for his house that she just destroyed, flicking the girl on the head. And the other nudge is for the very maternal Miss Bellamaya. And so he says that he needs a more robust house, and they are going to build a real wooden house. And with his life so busy as it is, it's a great advantage to acquire all the knowledge he desires during his visits to the library. And he talks about the materials for planning and other needs. And all that's missing is the method for smoothing the wood and finishing the roof. But then a girl approaches him, saying it's time to close, mentioning that he's been studying a lot. The protagonist is surprised that so much time has passed and apologizes to her for it. But she says it's alright, because seeing someone like him study so diligently really boosts her motivation to study as well. And she's Elkisla from the first year magic college, and the protagonist thinks it's as if she's using her eyes to beg him to tell her his name. And he says he's Ed Hoff Taylor, and the girl, hearing that name, is terrified. He thinks this is a familiar reaction, because as always, this guy's notoriety isn't going away. And it's no surprise to him, he's just been living cautiously. But that won't change anything. The girl is surprised though, and says he's extremely different from what the rumors say. He even read all the books on elementary studies, and they're difficult to understand. Even she would take days to understand him. But even now he's read more than 6 technical texts while sitting there, and they say he acts arrogantly, even though they don't know anything, saying that in the end you shouldn't trust rumors. And she knows someone who is just as sincere as he is, and says she'll be rooting for him someday. So he thanks the girl, and she wishes him a good trip back, saying she'll pack everything and return to the dormitory. But he hears a huge noise and asks what it is, and everything starts shaking, and the girl is almost hit by a pile of books. Meanwhile, episode 1, the final chapter, featuring Glasskin, begins, and the protagonist is surprised that it has already started. At 11:30 in the temporary camp, in front of the student center, several monsters appear. Thanks to the efforts of the main character, Taylor, and his friends, many students have gathered at the camp. 2 hours have passed since the beginning of this unprecedented disaster, and she looks up and says that she saw this in a book about spiritual magic, and that this is an invocation rune to summon the highest level dark spirit, Glass. Captain Phineas says this is bad news, because there's only one person with a high enough level of spiritual connection to summon so many spirits, and it's very likely that their enemy is the one who went into a rage because of the dark spirit. The top student in the second year, Jania Failover. They all fall silent, just listening to what Phineas has to say, and then Taylor steps forward, saying it's regrettable, but this isn't the time for excuses, and if the island is right, then the barrier hanging around the students will only buy them some time, and if Glasscom is summoned, there will be more victims, and they need to go inside the student center, and Claire says that people outside the barrier will notice soon enough, and if the Imperial Guard and the teachers deal with it quickly, everything will be fine. But Alvaro Aniston says that if it's the spirit of darkness, their barrier must be strong, and they have to resolve this from within. Since Director Obel is also out of town, she bets that if everyone there joins hands, they could even take down a high-level spirit. Questioning if they don't think so, then Klebe says he's against it. After all, imagine if they overcome these mid-level spirits and subdue the spiritual boss too. He questions if they'll even enter the building and take down Janica herself. And not only that, there are high-level spirits inside, 2 of them even. The Berserker spirit is a high-level fire spirit, Tarkan, and the Dark spirit is a high-level spirit, Philosopher. This is completely self-destructive, so he won't do it. But Loretta questions if she really did all this alone. After all, even for an excellent, a second-year student, she seems to be too powerful, as she is summoning Glasscom while manifesting all those spirits at the same time. She says that most of it is probably the power of Philosopher, and Jania is merely a medium to manifest it. The spirits of darkness are natural enemies of a spirit sorcerer, and their enormous power is simply beyond the control of a spirit sorcerer. Therefore, it is the evil spirits that actually control the spirit sorcerers, and that is why all spirit sorcerers fear them so much, because they easily become their prey. Even so, no one knows how Jania, the most outstanding student in spiritual studies, managed to command Philosopher, but then one of them says that this is not what matters at this moment. What is important now is to decide their plan of action, and they must wait for the teachers until the following morning or act on their own. There is only one person who can decide that, which is Princess Phineas, asking her to please order what they should do. She's about to do it, and everyone is looking at her, waiting for her decision. Just as everyone is waiting, suddenly, that guy's indifferent observation flashes through her mind. Then she remembers when Ed said that whatever burden he carries, it can't be heavier than the one she carries, questioning why she doesn't relax a little. But Phineas wonders how wonderful it would be if everything were that easy. She says they'll go in after an hour, but only she, her guard Cole, and the best students from each year and class will enter. She says only those who have proven their abilities will go, so they must make their preparations and sharpen their minds, and she will take responsibility for that. But then, the NPC arrives, calling the princess, saying that they've finished evaluating the resident teaching staff, and Aldrich's Hall and the potions warehouses are in protest, and it's unlikely they'll join them, and she realizes they're the only ones who can take the appropriate measures. And he says that he doesn't have any other students besides these. But then, they say there's one. And a girl with purple hair says that in the student library, there's a friend of hers, a second-year librarian trainee, and the princess asks what her name is. And they say it's Elka Aisland. But then the boy with the eyeliner asks if she just said Elka, and the girl says yes. And they're together in the librarian trainee class, learning how to manage grimoires, and then he gets angry, saying that they have to rescue her right now, because Elka is unable to defend herself. But then Loretto is the one who waits, saying that he knows his relationship with Elka is special, but the student library is very far away, and at that moment, to subtly address the cause of that problem, Janica herself comes first. and the princess agrees with this, saying that she also said that there's a second-year student in the library, questioning, what if they believe that student for now? Then he's a little hesitant, and the princess says with the other librarian, saying that she mentioned there was another student there, and the girl doesn't want to say what she knows. So Jigsaw tells her what she's hiding, asking her to tell right now, shaking the girl, and she says it's Ed Hoff-Taylor, and with that, Jigsaw gets even angrier, and she says she felt very sorry because he stayed there until very late at night, and she was bothered, so she left it to Elka, and they all know what kind of guy he is. And everyone remembers the protagonist with the worst image at least those who don't know him so well, and she says that Elka doesn't care about rumors like that, so everything is fine. Then the guy's thinking about Ed, it's that shameless one, and the apprentices are trapped in the library alone, and in that, the princess sees Jigsaw almost freaking out, so she asks him to wait and says that even so, it's a good thing to have a little faith in him, and everyone turns white seeing her say that, and the situation becomes horrible. Then Jigsaw flies off to the library, ignoring their orders, and as he leaves, he kills many of those minions, thinking that if the protagonist touches a single hair on Elka's head, he'll beat him until the boy is a wreck, and he leaves shouting Ed's name, and the term from poverty to wealth is explained, and it doesn't even come close to describing how miraculous Jigsaw's existence is. The Crescent Spear, and he himself, one day while hunting, sees a footprint, and says that judging by the size, it's an adult male, and considering the state of the tree bark ground, it seems it just passed by there, and so he finds it and says that the savannas of the Northern Empire are lands of savagery, where not even the voice of the Empire can reach, and a world where until the end of the day, you have to check your own neck to make sure it's still stuck in place, and he manages to take down his prey. Jigsaw was a descendant of the nomadic peoples who roamed that land, and when he came of age, he had been separated from his family, and he had no idea when he was abandoned, or why he was abandoned, or if he would ever be able to return to his herd, and he learned to slaughter a deer. Even before he learned to read, even before he learned how to buy goods, he had already learned to obtain supplies from corpses on the edge of Thethi Road. And that's not what he needs to say. And everyone sees that he's the guy from the northern fields, noticing that he's descended from those barbarians, and they say there are rumors that they even eat human flesh, and he drags that deer all over the place. And that was certainly the life of a beast. But then, someone asks him what his name is, and seeing that delicate girl, he's surprised and answers that it's Jigsaw. And she tells Jigsaw that he looks like a wolf walking on two legs, and that's when he realized a life spent wandering endlessly through the vast northern plains, that roadside carcass collector, sleeping with the moon as his roof. This boy was just a wolf cub who was abandoned by his pack. Then the girl asks Jigsaw if he's alright, and he realizes that all this time he lived such a lonely life, and the day he met his first life companion, Jigsaw suddenly understood the feeling of loneliness, and that's why his father welcomed him into his family. Chasing the accelerated pace of civilization, the wildlife became a distant memory at some point, and the wolf cub became a man. However, at that moment, he is destroying everything once again, thinking that if it means protecting her, he would gladly become a beast again. He thinks to himself that he heard rumors about this Ed Hoff-Taylor, so he knows that he cheated on the test, insulted the princess, and harassed one of the freshmen. He runs into the library and finds himself alone, searching for Ed, until he sees Ed lying on the floor, all bruised. The protagonist asks who he is, then asks where Elka is, questioning why he is there. First, he must tell him where Elka is, and he says she is in the reading room on the 3rd floor. Upon hearing this, Jigsaw abruptly leaves the protagonist and runs after her, asking if Elka is alright. When he arrives, the girl is lying down, peaceful, with the protagonist's coat protecting her. Jigsaw thanks God that she is alright, but ends up thinking about it, because all the book instances that would be difficult for an adult man to bring up are still surrounding Elka, as if trying to protect her, and the black curtains are there to block the view of the berserker spirits, and he notices something written there, saying that when she wakes up, she shouldn't panic and stay there, and everything will probably be resolved before dawn. So she should remain calm, block the entrance in, not provoke the spirits, telling her to think about her safety at all costs and not act rashly. And with that, he is touched, noticing that someone protected Elka, and he sees that blood. And it's not Elka's, realizing that despite being wounded, he didn't even care about his own body, and even protected Elka, and this probably belongs to Edith Taylor, and he wonders why on earth he did that. Then the protagonist thinks he was too close, and so, 3 hours ago, when everything collapsed, he managed to stop a bookshelf and protect the girl, and thankfully, he says he does some strength training regularly, and the episode is progressing faster, unlike what he expected, and casting the summoning rune. It's the beginning of the Glaska confrontation, and he's sure Taylor will take care of it. He shouldn't even be looking at a place like this, full of key characters in the story, because he can't let the future change. Even so, time is of the essence, and he can't afford to sit idly by. Soon, the low-class berserker spirits will come swarming, and he must block the entrance to keep them out. He should seize this chance, however small, to improve his shelter. Now Now he'll eat the dried meat he brought and spend the whole night researching. But then he realizes something, remembering that what makes Janika's powers so special is her strong mastery of spiritual understanding and spiritual connection, and these two attributes grow through contact with spirits. Since knowing the spirits themselves is a domain of her talent for him, who can't even see spirits, increasing his spiritual stats is almost impossible. But still, several of them are coming to the scene, and he thinks that Janica is sending materialized spirits. And this wonderful experience-boosting event is as sweet as honey, and he's going to take advantage of it by going after them. And he realizes that his magic has risen at an insane speed, with fire magic going to level 12, spiritual connection going to level 7, and spiritual understanding rising to the same level. And he says that the ignition level is 12, and even his spiritual magic has risen quite a bit, and he thinks that just one more level would be good. And he says that he was almost there. And if he had reached a total of 15 levels in spiritual connection and understanding, a spiritual contract would also be possible, and he thinks that he pushed himself to the limit. So if he went beyond that, it would have been really dangerous, and Jigsaw pauses by carrying the girl, questioning what he is doing there. But the protagonist wonders if he couldn't just ignore him after seeing him resting there with all his bruises, but thinks that really there's no need to lie to answer him. And the protagonist says he's training, and Jigsaw doesn't like it at all, noticing that the guy is lying, since only the most naive of humans would believe that. And he says he understands, saying that he feels he finally understands what kind of human being he is, being surprised that this is the kind of person he has always been, saying that he really owes him a great debt, lowering his head to the protagonist and calling him senior, saying that when the time comes, he will repay this debt at any cost. And the protagonist finally remembers that Elka was the same beloved of Jigsaw, and she wasn't important enough to appear in the scenario, so he completely forgot about it. But this guy is Taylor's friend, someone who trusted him from beginning to end of the story, and this guy is extremely important. So he says that looking at the situation, he left the student center and ran there. And since he's already confirmed Elka's safety, he should go and do what needs to be done, telling him to go back to the student center because his place isn't there. So he tells him to go help Taylor, because if he does what he says, things will work out. And Jigsaw asks if he means Taylor McLaughlin. The protagonist confirms that's exactly right. That guy is always avoiding failure. Jigsaw then says he doesn't know why he has so much regard for Taylor, since he's never even spoken to him. The protagonist explains that it's not that he considers him highly, but rather a matter of compatibility, especially because the shell of the high-level fire spirit Tarkin can only be damaged by that guy's elemental slash. The protagonist thinks to himself that in Act 1, Scene 9, Taylor learns one of his main moves, the elemental slash, to win that episode, and that skill is necessary. If he makes Taylor use that skill, he can win. Jigsaw thanks the boy for the advice, but the protagonist says he doesn't have time for that, telling him to hurry up because he's going to rest a bit. He even mentions that he gave him great advice, so everything should unfold according to the original story. But then he starts to get apprehensive because he realizes the boy spoke of Taylor as if he didn't even know him. If you knew who he was, or if he wasn't so close, you'd wonder why Jigsaw wasn't already friends with Taylor. He remembers that the final semester exam is a duel that Taylor suffers unilaterally, but learns the elemental strike, and then cuts Jigsaw's magic. Jigsaw acknowledges his perseverance and recognizes Taylor, and in the end, the two become friends. However, the final chapter of the first act happened a month before the original story, so everything went wrong, and Act 1 Scene 9 didn't even have a chance to happen. So, Jigsaw ended up not being friends with him, and Taylor couldn't learn the elemental cut. At that moment, nobody on the attack team can cause any damage to Tarkin, and he simply didn't realize it. But the entire original plot is already crumbling, and so, at the student center, at the attack team's base, Jigsaw arrives apologizing for being late, saying he'll make sure to pay for his mistakes. But the princess tells him to forget about it, because even with him there, they would have lost anyway. And so, the first attempt to infiltrate the base by the attack team fails. And Claire says that if they want to invade again, they'd better get more reinforcements, and he'll join them as soon as the pain in his leg goes away. But the princess says it's alright, and he should rest at the base, since he can't even walk properly. However, he says that the princess was him, that if she really cares about him, she should give up on this. But she tells Claire that she has a heart to, and he knows it. And she says that unfortunately their retreat was successful, but Claire is out of the team. Klebs, the best combat student of the first year, is also injured, and she questions if there's any way out, saying that they'll do everything possible to eliminate Tarkin with the people they have. However, the protagonist arrives, saying that they don't have time to go after Tarkin. Judging by the progress of the summoning ritual, it will be complete soon, and the princess is surprised to see the protagonist there. He says this is the last thing he wanted to do, but he has no choice. He says he will split the raid team in two, and he will take command of one side. He thinks that from now on, he will intervene in the plot. My friend has taken the reins, but I want to see what the protagonist will do now. Then the protagonist remembers the failed swordsman's strategy guide from Sylvania Ep 1. The first act, spiritual sorceress Janica Filovia, voice of the final chapter. And remember everything he needs to know for that fight, and tell everyone that he'll be in charge. Everyone there sees Roth Taylor like that, and Klebs asks if he thinks it's a joke. But Jixu asks them to listen to the boy. Eddie says they need to get past the fire spirit that Janica summoned and deal with the dark spirit, Velasfia, who has taken over Janica. However, as they must have seen during their fight against Tarkan, they can't cause him any damage because of his shell, and they don't necessarily have to go directly to Tarkan. As soon as one team gets Tarkan's attention, the other can enter the combat training field to subdue the suppressed Janica. After avoiding Tarkan, they can face Janica directly, but Lortel says they absolutely won't do that. He's nothing like the Tarkan from the combat practice, and they only manage to retreat by pure luck. She asks what they'll do if the lure group fails and Tarkan starts fighting to pursue the subjugation group, or if the attraction group is exterminated and if things go wrong. And in the end, they will end up dealing with both at the same time, and it's too big a risk. And he says that she can only assess the risks when she has other options. And the most important objective in the end is to defeat Janica, because that way Tarkan will also be powerless. So, Jixu says that the problem is who will be part of the attraction group. And Lortel says that this is not just choosing people who want to commit self-destructs, but Taylor is the first to say that he will do it. However, the protagonist says no, telling him not to do anything and to go back there. And he will be part of the group, which will enter the combat training camps. But Taylor says it's quick, and he doesn't know how long he can run. But if someone has to do it, it should be him. However, the protagonist says that it seems he is mistaken. They are not choosing sheep for sacrifice, and they don't need to divide exactly in half either, and Klebs and Lortel are enough, and with him included. The three of them will lure Tarkan, but Klebs asks why him, since he doesn't want to die. And Lortel also says she will refuse with all due respect, and the protagonist tells them to believe him, because he has a way to tie Tarkan's feet. But Klebs goes crazy with this, because he prefers to die than fight Edhoff and Taylor. And so Lortel also doesn't believe him, and the protagonist thinks he doesn't have much time. But then Princess Fuenia says she sees nothing wrong with what he is saying, and still doesn't understand his intentions, but she will do as he wants, saying that this is her order, as Fuenia, Ellis, Clole, third princess of the Clole Empire. And they will divide Hyde's group into two groups. Taylor, Jix, Alvera, Ayla, and Yahello will be part of the group that will subdue Janica. Klebs, Lortel, and Edhoff and Taylor, they will be part of the group that will lure Tarkan. And lastly, it will be very brief because they are running out of time, and just to be safe, they mustn't die at all cost, and each group goes in a different direction. And in the Nile building, and in the corridor, they come face to face with the spirit. Then Lortel asks how he will buy time with that fire lizard as his opponent, and the protagonist simply tells her to do as he says, because if things go according to plan, they will surely win. And the creature is lying there peacefully while they run upstairs. And the protagonist Klebs is told not to worry because Klebs, the melancholic one, is very timid and lacks confidence. And despite his abilities, he is the best student among the freshmen in the combat department. And he says it's because he will be able to do it. And Klebs thinks that this brat is full of confidence, ultimately questioning whether he really has a way to win. And then that thing rises, and Eddie thinks that behind the door of the combat training field is the failover gene, and to proceed, he only needed to attract Tarkan. And Klebs thinks he was convinced by the princess's firm attitude and went there. But since he is not alone, perhaps he can even gather some courage. But then the dragon begins to gather a huge bijudama in its mouth, scaring the boy. And he says that he is experiencing the beginning of the battle, asking the protagonist how he can attract that thing. But when he looks to the side, neither of them is there, and only that the dragon and Klebs himself are already on the boy's neck. And he realizes they tricked him, saying they deceived him. And he questions why they're doing this to him, cursing everyone, telling them to go away, because they hate him and hate this world. Outside, Lortel remembers what the protagonist said when he told her to leave. Now that they've taken Klebs to the Nile Hall corridor, and it's done, she questions whether he'll sacrifice Klebs in the end, saying it's not a bad idea, but he won't be able to escape moral criticism. But the protagonist says that first of all, he's not a sacrifice. This guy, despite his appearance, is an excellent student, and he's very resilient. Besides, the most important role will be Lortel's. Outside the Nile Hall, outside the combat training fields, the girl is gathering her magic, and he says it's because she is tasked with securing the entrance for the subjugation group and landing a critical blow on Tarka. She begins by saying she doesn't think she should jump to conclusions about him. After hearing rumors, she starts summoning several magic circles, and the protagonist says he's sure everyone will hesitate and doubt themselves, but she's good at these things, telling her to just blow everything up. She attacks with that absurd ice magic, breaking a huge hole in the wall, and with that, she opens the hole, Then she asks what everyone is doing while they are scared, and she says they have to go inside. The girl starts remembering that during joint combat training, she blew up the ceiling of the Nile Hall with forbidden intermediate level magic, wondering if that's why he left it to her, saying he really is an interesting guy. Anyway, the entrance is ready, and now what remains? It's Clebius doing his part, attracting the dragon that's still after him. And she remembers the protagonist saying that even if the plan works, and Hyde's group manages to get in without running into Tarkin, Clebius, and he will still have to deal with Tarkin, since he'll be running around, and going against Tarkin and Student. Square means there's no escape, asking if she wants him to die. So the protagonist says that he can't run away, and the only way is to arrest him, because of his cascading nature, no attack would work. Anyway, she questions whether he didn't see it during training, and she already lost to him once. Not to mention that not a single member of Hyde's group could even scratch him, and the protagonist says they can use that to deal with his hard shell, telling them to just prepare and gather mana, and the girl questions what that is, and so the protagonist thinks Loretta was right, and they continue running while trying to stop that thing. And the protagonist says that without the elemental cut, there's no one in Hyde's group who can break Tarkin's shell, so that thing continues breaking the girl's magic, chasing after Clebios relentlessly. But the protagonist, coming from above, throws himself on top of that thing and says that what they need is a huge, totally overwhelming firepower, and he finally finds the firepower he needs. And Lucia is sleeping peacefully while all this happens, and he says that since the final chapter is difficult, there is very few people attempt to complete all the additional achievement conditions, but he has done it countless times. On one occasion, he reads the system saying that if he wants to achieve 100% completion of Hyde, Deli must be found playing her ukulele in the meadow behind the archery range, and Lucia is napping on the roof of the Oval building, and Belly can be found next to the statue in Alim Square. He simply grabs the girl, who questions what the hell is happening because she's swaying and wants to nap. He questions how she's sleeping in the middle of all this, and furthermore, how can it be called a nap, since Lucia had nowhere to sleep because the shelter had been destroyed. So, she went to the roof where she usually takes a nap. To be exact, she was sleeping until now because she had to be excluded from the plot, and Janica's condition isn't good, and Belly and Maya got angry because of it. So Lucia ended up fleeing, expending all her magic by falling asleep, and probably this was a game device to exclude this super powerful character from the current scenario. But he starts betraying the girl, showing her dried meat, and she smells it, waking up instantly. He tells her to eat a lot, ordering her to eat everything, stuffing her with dried meat. He says that the game doesn't have the privilege of being demanding now, since the entire original plot has been completely lost. Then he simply grabs the girl and throws her like a Pokemon, saying that the target is the flaming fire lizard. He wonders if he'll be able to hit it at that distance, but there's no need to worry, as he did this a lot in the army. He orders everyone to duck while he throws his weapon X, and the weapon goes directly to Arcana. She continues saying that he is very evil, and with that, she clashes face to face with the power of that dragon, and when she is face to face, she uses high-rank electrokinesis magic, divine punishment, on everyone, including the dragon, and Loretta uses everything she has to protect herself and Clebius from being taken by that thing. And the protagonist can barely contain himself, and he says that in some ways, this is the most important moment. Of all of them, Tarkin is a high-level fire spirit with a tough Karapachi, and it prevents them from capturing him, even if they all rush towards him. He's together, but after being hit by Lucy's high-rank magic, even that hard shell is crumbling, and now even his attacks can damage him, and naturally, he'll have a lot of XP left when he's eliminated, and now that he's gone all the way there, he's going to grab whatever he can to, running over there, all hungry to level up, and he says that the last hit will definitely be his, man. I was even going to call him a scoundrel, but after everything the kid did to overcome the challenge, he more than deserves it. Meanwhile, Jenica remembers her mother, being very proud of her, saying she's adorable. A friend says she's very proud of her, and a teacher says she's the hope of the second-year students, saying that only she demonstrated the proper skills during this joint combat training. Another woman says that of course they can trust Jenica to handle this, because without her, their second year would have been much worse. The girl just absorbed so much energy, and they say they're very lucky to have Jenica there, until the girl starts to explode. Everyone is surprised by this, and Jenica, seeing them there, thinks she should welcome them with her usual smile, wishing them well. This is all while she's being controlled by that demon, who is holding the girl right in the middle of its chest. They are surprised by this, and the protagonist, thinking about the hall, wonders if they've already started on Jenica's side. He's certain that all this will end at dawn, and fortunately, he's not too far off either. Late, Cleves continues running from that thing, and he asks where Lucia is. She says she's somewhere, rolling around in a corner maybe. The protagonist says it would have been great if she had finished things off. Lortel says she's not sure if she still has the energy for it, but the protagonist says it doesn't matter, and they'll finish it themselves. After all, they had been planning to do this since earlier. Lortel says she used all her magic to launch the 2 ice spears at it, but it's still resisting, and that spirit is a very resilient son of a bitch. The protagonist says they have to cut its throat. His ice magic isn't very suitable for precise cuts, so he'll do it himself. Lortel says he's also from the Magic Academy, suggesting that maybe it would be better if Klebs, who carries a blade, did it. But then the protagonist questions whether he'll be able to do it, and looking at him running and asking for help. The girl thinks not. The protagonist, he says he'll take responsibility and put an end to it. So she must stop that monster from moving just this once. And he's betting on her and putting his life at risk, so she must do it right. But Lortel says that when he talks about taking responsibility, and she does that, and he's betting his life on it, putting his life into it. It's very easy for him to say these things, but in reality it's just a blind gamble. But the protagonist says it's not a gamble, and what he means is that the price of a life is not cheap at all, and this is an investment. And with him talking about investment, she says that this is her specialty, and she says that she likes him more than that princess who is acting like a monarch, just because she's of royal lineage, and he risked his life for her. Then Lortel Sayswitch will put his life at risk for him too, and the protagonist says he's going to attack. And while Klebs says it doesn't matter, he can't keep running away anymore, so the dragon, seeing him coming, gets even angrier, and the protagonist says that both Klebs and he are at the limit of their strength, and despite that, now he understands why Klebs was so scared, being face to face with that thing. But then the protagonist dares a little of that wind magic, and he says that not yet. He has to get even closer, but then he hears a scream and gets a fright. Then Klebs asks what the hell that is. A red hand right in front of them, and the protagonist notices that it's Glaskin's right arm. This means that Tyler's group must have entered the final phase of the boss. This means that things are going well as expected, but the timing isn't good, and Talcina would attract anyone's attention. But still, with that fire coming towards him, Loritel's magic strikes him, hitting the monster right in the face, and he thinks that even amidst such great turbulence, Loritel doesn't make mistakes. The girl tells him it's time, ordering him to go now, and the protagonist rushes inside the dragon, saying the same applies to him, being close enough to use his wind magic. He explains that it's because he's cast this magic hundreds of thousands of times, the wind blade, and with it he manages to cut off the dragon's head. The dragon begins to disintegrate, and thus he defeats the high-ranking fire spirit, Tarka. His spiritual connection proficiency, along with his spiritual understanding, increases, and his spiritual connection proficiency increases several times. All his stats increase, and his spiritual contract slot is unlocked, allowing him to make a contract with the spirit. Seeing this, the protagonist is surprised by Taylor, who is now attacking Tarkin, and he begins to chop up the monster's arm, ending with him and being thrown down, and the boy is already transformed into white hair, and the protagonist thinks that he is in fact the protagonist. And with that scene finally ends. And after a while, already in the morning, Loretto says that she met many people in life, saying that they are seriously risking their lives, but most of them were cowards, and the protagonist questions if that's true. Then she asks what the problem is, since they went through a life or death crisis together. But what's with that empty expression? Asking him to let her, Gosh formally introduces herself once again, stating her name is Loretto Kelching, and the protagonist greets her. She then hands him 3 gold coins, saying she won this time, that she caught him off guard, and that he now owes her a favor. She asks what he plans to do, as she expects to see him again sometime. The protagonist wonders if she will keep in touch, but he doesn't really want to get involved with her. However, he sees someone approaching, and it's Taylor himself. Taylor says he's resentful towards him at this moment, believing Taylor knows very well why. Then the protagonist notices Taylor's appearance, realizing his swordsman form has manifested exactly as it was in the game. And he says it turned out really cool, and Taylor says that despite all that, a debt is still a debt, thanking the protagonist. But then Kleb starts talking to Taylor, saying that he doesn't need to show respect to someone like him, because he doesn't. It's known when he's going to back someone up, and he almost died because of the protagonist. But Jigsaw tells Klebs to calm down when Loretta is the princess, also telling him to calm down. And she talks to Ed, Hoth, and Taylor, saying he's doing a lot for them this time, and she can recommend him to the student council and everything. But the protagonist says there's no need, and Lucy was the biggest help in defeating Tarkin. And Taylor also killed Velos, Fairy, and Glaskin, so they should focus on that for now. And seeing the note that he's throwing credit away, saying it's no secret that Lucy and Taylor did a great job, and they're talking about other things besides that, asking if he's ashamed, but Jigsaw tells her that he's a veteran, telling her to show respect. But she questions why he keeps hanging around the protagonist, but he keeps telling her to show respect for him, and the protagonist thinks he's kept his distance from all the main characters, so as not to affect the original plot. However, now that he could look at them all at once, he couldn't help but feel that warm and welcoming atmosphere. After all, he had seen them play their roles in this world, and solve their own problems time and time again. Taylor, who grows stronger with each trial. Ella, who grows stronger with Taylor. Felania, who embraces her destiny as monarch and slowly becomes an adult. Jigsaw, who finds his own path in the midst of civilization, along with Cleavers, who gains more self-confidence. and self-assurance, Elvira, who realizes that life isn't all fun and excitement, and Loretto, who wants to spend her life buried in gold coins. Examining their lives, they were all main characters who had their own roles to play, who in the end had received a trophy called success. Knowing this, he withdrew and went to a place he couldn't visit during the course of the game's plot, the stage where the first act's confrontation took place, and that podium cabinet is the same place where Lucy used to take a. He dozed off during the joint combat training exercise because, no matter how much he thought about it, something seemed wrong, and he had to go there to personally oversee the protagonist's success. But it seems someone remained hidden in the background, and the protagonist, looking at her, remembered when he was with Laura and asked her why Janica was in such a furious state. The girl said she thought she had an idea, and once she happened to see Janica's room, and each and every item there was beautiful, gifts that symbolized the sincerity and gratitude of the people who believed in her. There were so many gifts that there wasn't room to open a book on that enormous table, and the sticky notes stuck to her wall weighed on her shoulders like stones. And the solution to all of that was very simple. All she had to do was remove the stickers from the wall and store the numerous gifts on her desk, somewhere in the room. But Janica's anguish stemmed from her inability to do this like the main character in a fairy tale, and she was obsessed with having to honor all the goodwill and the sincerity that he received from the world with ultimate imperfection. And there's no need to explain how reckless that was, since Velosfer took advantage of that darkness and made Janica enter a rage mode, which was to be expected. But the question is why this happened a month earlier than it should have and before the training. With the combat set, originally, the hero of that scenario was Taylor, but since Luce made him fly all at once, all the students became fans of Jania, and the contract between Miriam and Luce was the reason why Taylor was surprised in an attack. Luce managed to secure this contract because she frequently visited the forest in the north, all because it contained a perfect place for her to take a nap. The person who built that perfect place for her to nap was the protagonist, a certain character who should have left when the first act began. So, Jania says she thinks Luce napped there because it's very cozy, but she didn't expect him to find her so easily. She thinks the others forgot about her in the midst of all the chaos, and this hurt her a little. After all, after causing havoc and creating such a magnificent stage for everyone to see, now that it's all over, she's left aside. She thought they would look for her, asking where Jania is. But the protagonist realizes she's saying this, but was actually hiding so that someone would find her. She says she really can't argue with that, and that she didn't expect him to find her so quickly, and she just wanted to stay inside a little longer. The protagonist then questions why, and the girl continues with that fake smile on her face, saying it's because she's about to cry really badly now. Looking at her, he remembers when Luce told him that the wolf was asking Ed to save Janica, and he remembers the wolf's message, because it seems he asked to save Janica from falling into a situation like this. But that can't happen, because he's the only one who knows the future, and he must have thought that while everyone else was paying attention and pressuring her, the only person trying to keep their distance while pushing her away would actually be someone Janica could trust. In the end, Janica failed, and she tried to make a contract with a high-ranking spirit, but her haste during the summoning ritual caused her to become a victim of the dark spirit, destroying the department building. The process, and she studied and practiced magic until late every day, and she always smiled at her family, friends, and teachers who truly supported her. But although she seemingly met everyone's expectations, she must have gone through very difficult and secretive moments. And as the process itself that she went through was so beautiful, so too, paradoxically, was the failure itself something beautiful? And he says that he can't say what happens. The comforting thing, these words can be for her, and he tells Janica, saying that she tried very hard. And he tells her that at the top of the stage the parade of proud main characters takes place, where applause and praise roll in. On the other hand, behind the stage it is dark and silent, and the villain from the first act exits the stage just as the main characters move on, and the girl starts to cry. And Ed says he's witnessed the conclusion of the first act countless times, but he thinks that only now. He truly saw everything through to the end, because he couldn't see them before. And Sophie, his spiritual connection reaches level 10, along with spiritual understanding, and the low-ranking fire spirit is interested in him, along with Driz. And the high-ranking wind spirit, Merilda, also shows extreme interest in the boy. 10 days have passed since the end of Janica's disciplinary committee trial, and Janica acknowledged all her mistakes, and declared that she should willingly accept her punishment. However, during the first trial, all of Janica's teachers and friends showed their full support. During the second trial, Fulia said that she could not be judged for the attempted assassination of royalty, as she testified that Janica was dominated by Velister, and precisely for that reason, everything she did was unintentional. Lortel stepped forward to resolve the damage suffered, and the Elt Trade Association fully compensated the funds for the Academy's restoration, without asking for anything in return, although they added a conditional clause to the contract to have the order fees on school supplies. In any case, the result of all this was the removal of any benefits granted to the top students of the year, and the withdrawal of all awards and decorations of glory, and disqualification disqualification from entry to the law office hall from the next semester, along with 10 days probation and a 20-day suspension, and the expulsion is revoked. And it seemed as if they had just filmed a moving montage of a coming-of-age drama, and just as things begin to return to normal, everyone is relieved. But one girl notices that Jenika's shoulders seem more slumped than usual, and she must be under a lot of stress, so they think that in that case, they have to prepare by making a big tea party. And the girl tells her friend not to even hint at the Glasgow incident, telling her not to do anything that might upset her, and never to ask her how she feels or anything like that, making sure to keep the conversation strictly about personal matters. And the girl says that this is all for simulation, asking if she is okay. And she tells Clara that she is, and so they try talking to Jenika, but Jenika asks about liking and loving someone, questioning why they think there's such a difference between the two. And Clara asks why she suddenly commented on something like that, and the girl says it's about her friend, and that friend had a dream where she's lying in a green field with a crown of flowers in her hand, and someone comes there, talking to her, calling Jenika, and that someone, by chance, is our protagonist, and she puts that crown on his head, saying she prepared it for Eddie, and the two run through that grassy field. And she says she's having that dream repeatedly, or rather, her friend is having it. And the two realize that Jenika has been given probation for 10 days, and she couldn't see any of her friends, realizing that this was a lie. And then asked what else this friend said. And Jessica says that she said she stayed in her room, staring blankly into any corner, and suddenly, that person's face comes to her mind. Then says that she's very silly, saying that it was to help the teacher run away, then leaves Clara there alone. And she thinks she needs to approach this slowly and carefully to avoid hurting his feelings. Jenika is extremely sensitive, and if things go wrong, the entire student council will find out about Jenika Filovia's love story, and she can't even imagine that happening. She talks to Jenika, asking if she shouldn't think about it simply, without many complications, and whether she liked or hated someone is kind of a confusing mystery. The girl questions whether it is, and asks if it wouldn't be better for her to be honest about these emotions now, or rather, for her friend. The girl says she's right, saying she was right about herself, and as expected from Clara. Clara says that besides that, from now on, she should try to be careful when talking about such delicate subjects, because it won't be good for her reputation, or rather for her friend's reputation. The girl says that could have been bad, so Clara says she foresaw the rumors for now, and the girl thanks her for giving her sincere advice, saying she needs to go back to the office hall now to report her suspension. Clara says she'll be there in a little while, because she has to organize her thoughts, and when the girl leaves, she thinks she succeeded, totally desperate, my friend. If that girl, the goddess of the school, whom everyone loves, says she likes, or rather, is in love with the most problematic guy there, that's going to be a mess I don't even want to see. And the protagonist in another corner is completely there, that's it, saying that. Before all this, he tirelessly saved money, but thanks to Fuenia's petition, he was exempted from the tuition for the next semester. And with the gold coins he got, he bought some tools, but then he sees Jenika in the middle of the path, all giddy, and he says that he avoided her all this time. But now that the first act where Jenika was the main character is over, he can talk to her. He greets the girl, remembering that her probation ends now. He says that it would be good if he took the first step and said hi, and the girl gets all giddy, simply running behind a tree, talking to him, talking to Ed, who yes, it's over, and he finds it very strange, while the girl tries to be honest about how she's feeling, and she says she has things to do at the Hall of Awfuls, saying he'll see her running off later. And for Jenika, the level of difficulty was very high, and Broda thinks he's somehow impressive, with Ed Hoff-Taylor even making the good and kind Jenika lose her composure, but he tries to remain calm, not wanting to be too clingy. After all, he's about to be busy now, and he says that finally it's time to build his cabin. And on day one, he says he chose the location to build the cabin. He chose a wide, shady area that doesn't stand out too much. He started working calmly, and on day 3, he started gathering wood and became quite proficient with the wind blade. And then, everything went well, and on the 6th, he paused the firewood collection for the time being, since the end of semester results were released. And he had high grades in the practical classes, and his results on the theoretical exams were much higher than the average for freshmen. And as a special note, Jenika continued to ignore him the whole time, and her friends Clara and Andy looked at him as if to say he shouldn't dare show his face, but he hasn't given it much thought. And on the 18th, the woodworking was almost finished, complete, and he wonders if anyone has ever become as proficient with the wind blade as he has. On the 20th, the holidays begin, and now he can invest all his time in building that cabin. A special observation is that he went to check the trap and he had set, only to find the dishes and catch them in the trap. He sleeps peacefully, and he begins to realize he should stop using dried meat as whiskey. On the 27th, the senior maid, Belmaya, comes to give him some herbs and mushrooms. She takes the opportunity to ask the protagonist protagonist how things are going with Janica, and when he tells her that Janica might hate him now, which is why she's been avoiding him, Belmaya simply tilts her head. On the 30th, with the pillar as the center, the outer wooden walls collapse, and he realizes that simply fitting the joints correctly wasn't enough to make it stable, and it simply became a mess. He also mentions that he encountered Janica's group again in bakery, and Janica simply ran away the moment their eyes met. And finally, the friends begin to realize that maybe the protagonist is to blame for everything. And so, on day 37, Jigsaw went to help the protagonist, and the boy says that as Eddie said, Taylor seems like a really nice guy, and the protagonist is surprised by this, because it's great that it's following the original plot. And the boy even asks if they're going to hammer nails all over that side too, but the protagonist says to leave that side because this is for the chimney. And I'm starting to feel that the protagonist house is going to be everyone's base of operations, and soon everyone will be holed up in the poor guy's shack. And so the days go by without stopping, and on day 45, he enters his cabin, falling inside to relax a little, and neither the floor nor the walls are damaged, and there isn't a single piece of furniture, and it's just a cabin made of rough wooden logs, but it has exterior walls and a roof too. And if he closes the door completely, the insects might not get in, and with that, a new creation of his is made, a 4-star log cabin, and his crafting proficiency increases considerably. And with that, he thinks that now he finally has a house. And Janica continues watching from outside, still completely smitten with the protagonist. Ed, after a while, says he's finished the wall, the floor, and the fireplace, and it would be good to put up a fence too, along with a woodshed and a few other things. That would be great as well. But then someone knocks on his door, and he immediately says that it's not some kind of sleeping tower, and the girl is already up there falling asleep. But then someone arrives talking to Ed, and it's Jana who arrives there, and she questions what brings her from so far away. The girl had been there the whole time, and while I was brushing her hair another day, she says that while she was in the forest last time, she went to young Master Ed's camp, and found the sight there really shocking. The girl asks if she means the cabin, then kind of asks how she knew. She says she saw her while she was passing by, and the girl says she understands, saying that. Anyway, he said he built it himself, but personally, it was much more impressive and well built than she expected, and she was quite surprised by that. After all, she didn't know he had a talent for such things, and the girl says she understands, so she says. She also wanted to take a look inside, after all. Take a look, a walk around, see how sturdy it is. And the girl says she's also curious about these things, and she says of course, because she's also human, and anyone who saw a cabin like that on their way would be curious to know who built it, how they did it, and what it's like inside. It's an extremely natural and expected phenomenon, and adding fuel to the girl's fire, saying it's totally natural and expected, and the girl is amazed by that. And in the present, she tells Ed, who was passing by, and after seeing the Mariota from there, saw the cabin, and then passed by. After all, anyone who saw a cabin like that would be curious to know who built it, and what it's like inside. And she questions if it isn't natural, and she's desperate, and the protagonist, she agrees with him, and he says it's a fantastic cabin. The protagonist says he built it recently, but asks if the spirits didn't tell him about it. The girl gets all giddy, saying they told her a little, just casually, like, there's a cabin, and didn't say anything else. But the spirits detailed everything that was going on, saying you can see his beautiful muscles when he takes off his shirt, and the muscles in his arms have gotten a little thicker, and the thin veins near his collarbone, compared to the back of his hand, have also gotten bigger. She says that's all they told her, nothing more. But the daily reports were much stronger. She says that after all, she hasn't been talking to the spirits much lately, but she knows every detail. She swears she doesn't know the details of what he does and how he's been living, and this with a bloody nose. Then he asks if she wants to go inside and give him some advice. One look. Hold on a minute, Mrs. Florinda. Don't look at it like that. He asks if she wants a cup of coffee inside. Calm down, buddy. And Eddie says it's just a wooden cabin, and the girl is overjoyed to go inside. And once inside, she asks if he did all this by himself, getting excited about each of the things she sees there. And during the night, he lights a bonfire, and the girl sits around it, saying that this time, she owes a great debt to the others. The princess, Lortel, they did so many things, and some of her friends even said they would lend her money monthly, but how is she going to pay them back? But the protagonist says that if she can't pay them, she simply shouldn't do it, asking if it's not a generalization to think that she has to pay what she owes. And she says she never thought about it that way. She was completely terrified, and the protagonist thinks that's the kind of person Janica is. She can't understand that the incident happened because the weight of all that honesty and pressure weighed on her, and despite so many people supporting her with monthly fees, or rather, investing in her, she decided to move from the Feely salon, with its state-of-the-art facilities, to the old-fashioned deck salon, all because she wanted to owe less to others, even if just a little. And in the Feely's hall there is a room for each student, but in the Haldex, There are 8 or more students in a single room, and spending the whole day being looked at with envy would be like being chained in a prison for Janica, and in the end, that wouldn't solve any of those implicit problems. That the vicious cycle hasn't ended yet. He tells her that if she wants to isolate herself, she can come by anytime, and he doesn't mind. With that, the girl just smiles, saying that it really makes her happy, and tells her that if he ever feels overwhelmed or can't handle something alone, she hopes he won't hesitate to tell her, and when that happens, she will help him at all cost. The boy likes that, thinking about being overwhelmed, and the second semester was approaching, and this is more or less near the beginning of Act 2, and he talks about the sealed grimoire of the sage, and that small worn book will cause a great storm, and Loretto is looking at him, saying that it was worth it. After all, it smells like money to her, and it will devour the entire academy, but it won't. It will happen, at least not to him, and he thinks Taylor will go through difficult times. It won't have anything to do with him, but it will be really difficult. He will be rooting for the boy, and he talks once again about the failed swordsman from Sylvania, and they are in episode 11, Occupation of the Aphilus Hall and the Honor. Students in the Aphilus Hall have a life like that of nobles, almost guaranteed. First choice of seats in a class, guaranteed freedom during mealtimes, special maids, and tons of other convenient advantages on a completely different level. And that's where the problem arises, because there were heavy rains on the southwest side of the Valoria region at the time of the return to classes after the holidays, and according to the academy, only the students of the Aphilus Hall were provided with carriages and boats to return to school, and if they couldn't return on time, they were given the advantage of resting for a few days. And the inferior students of the Dex Hall, who faced the rain without any benefits, were afraid of losing grades for not meeting the deadline. Returning to the academy on time frustrated them, and eventually, the repressed feelings of these students exploded in front of the Opheles Hall. All of this occurred under the influence of a merchant who said that the rain was falling heavily, just as she had imagined. The merchant then contacted the representative of the lower-ranking students, and this man only cared about causing trouble at the academy and in the Opheles Hall. Discontent was already at an all-time high, and the only thing they needed was a plausible justification for the lower-ranking and quota students to rely on. Elaine, who was an expert at provoking and manipulating others with his words, would pull the trigger to start it all, and the justification was already defined. It was clear that there was discriminatory treatment against the lower-ranking students, who had to brave heavy rain to get to school, and against the students from Sala Opheles. The proposal would suggest a more proactive change in the return-to-school deadline, also supported by recognition from the academy, with regard to the special treatment that the students of the Solanophilus has been receiving. And the headmaid of the Opheles Hall and part of the academy's administrative division are already on Loretto's side, and they fervently supported Loretto's proposal. But at this point, it didn't matter whether the academy would actually accept Loretto's proposal or not. The mere idea of discussing it as a solution was enough to enrage the ordinary students, who made the situation as big and flashy as possible and attacked the Opheles Hall in some way. The Opheles Hall was decorated with works of art donated by noble and wealthy families, and even the walls, carpets, and wooden furniture were crafted by artisans. The more damage done to the property, the better. And while they were doing this, it would be better if they completely destroyed the Opheles Hall. The more out of control they became, the greater the critical impact on the academy's finances, which were already in a difficult situation due to the Glaskin incident, since negotiations for the sealed grimoire of the sage were underway. This would give the trade association of Elt has a distinct advantage, all because the sealed grimoire of the wise is like the heart of the Sylvania Academy. But in moments of despair, people are willing to offer even their own hearts. And in the midst of that chaos, Loretto is looking at the rain, and there isn't a single ray of light in that dark sky, and it's like the sky she saw in the favelas wearing those tattered rags. And she can't help but mock herself or feel relieved. And in that romantic land of learning, there is plenty of light, and because of that light, the image of herself living in this total darkness is clearer than ever. And the filthy being she has become is becoming increasingly evident to her, and the traces of the conspiracy on her desk are proof of this. Traces of a person who lived a life never showing the slightest sincerity, and always betraying and distrusting others, while desperately fighting to survive, and that's what she has become. But that doesn't change the essence of her filthy self, so she frantically searches for someone like her, and even in Sylvana, where many bright and radiant people reside there must be someone among them who recognizes and knows what the disgusting life of a filthy gutter rat is like. And the endless search for someone like her never stopped, despite the empty hope in her heart. And she begins to feel a terrible loneliness all because her true self will never change, and to overcome the miserable reality, Lortel always adopted the same posture, and Lortel was the dark curtain that covered the grim reality behind the stage at all times. And the spectators called her the Black Veil, and outside of Opheles, the students said they could no longer endure that treatment, and that is the land of learning, and at least they should guarantee equality in grades. And in the original plot, the incident of the occupation of the Opheles Hall is a story where the main character has to stop the inferior students who were instigated by Lortel, and in doing so, a maid is surprised and asks what is happening, saying that she must report it to the head maid. It is said that there are intermediate bosses from the 1st to the 5th floor of the Opheles Hall who interrupt the main character and help the lower-ranking students. And the boss, the intermediary on the 1st floor, is Toady, a fatso who mocked Taylor, calling him a loser, and was beaten up by Taylor's friends. He held a grudge against them and was bribed by Lortel. His main role was to subdue the new maid guarding the 1st floor, grabbing her, putting the frog on her head, and taking her away. He also had to open the door to Opheles' hall, bringing all the students inside. Everyone was surprised to find the doors open, but they decided to enter because they wanted decent treatment. They weren't asking for much, they just wanted humane treatment, promising to make their voices heard. After the students passed through the 1st floor, the intermediate bosses of Act 2 made Toady play a certain role to stop the main character and his friends who came to stop them. The four-eyed character then asked if he was the one Lortel bribed, and he confirmed it. Originally, this role was supposed to be Toshi's, but who's playing it now? He's Eddie Hoftaylor, and he's questioning how the heck he became an intermediate boss. The guy went from an initial boss that would disappear in 15 minutes to an intermediate boss in a second phase, and I think he went up in health. Eddie says that to explain how this happened, he needs to go back to the events of 2 days ago. The first was the incident at the Office D demonstration, and at that moment, when the protagonist was using all his combat skills, he sees a footprint on the ground and notices it again. Eddie Hoftaylor really has no talent when it comes to combat skills, and he's forcing himself to use the bow every time he hunts. A whole semester and half of the holidays have already passed, and yet his proficiency with the bow is totally ridiculous. But more importantly, recently at camp, he keeps receiving visits more and more frequently from Belly and May, and also Jasuk, and he questions how he can put them into words, because he feels that the fact of living in the northern forest is something that many people are becoming aware of. And anyway, among the frequent visits, 3 are worth mentioning because visitor A is a brilliant and extraordinary image, and she usually visits him at random times, and she is surprised that the protagonist now has a door, asking him to make a back door as well, asking if he will also make a chimney, but the protagonist simply throws the girl out, and she questions why there isn't a glass window, saying that it wouldn't break, stating that they couldn't use magic nearby, and the protagonist can't stand the girl anymore, and she asks how about he make a window through the roof as well, and he says that things simply don't happen the way he wants when it comes to her. And while visitor B, he was really happy to receive her, and then Janie arrives bringing him eggs, saying that Belle said he would like them if she gave him some, and he says that she is the best student in the 2nd year and a great spiritual sorceress, and she tells him that if you put boiling water with salt and stomp on it like that, the clothes will lighten, and that's what his parents used to do this when the clothes got too dirty on their farm. And he says that despite her frequent visits, he received her without any discomfort, as she came almost daily chatting with the spirits and helping him with everyday tasks. And what's more, he already put her in charge of the house. She'll be gone soon. And she's all giddy, doing it, and he says that his gratitude for her is endless, and tells Janica that she's amazing, asking how she knows so much about these things. And the girl gets all giddy hiding her shyness, and he's surprised, because he only praised her, and he starts to think that she seems quite easy to read. And then she ends up asking the protagonist something, asking how often. Hello, you come over there, already with its undear look. And this one is trouble. You know, this one is trouble. And the protagonist begins to notice that sometimes something seems out of the ordinary about her. But anyway, she's his B visitor, and the main reason he decided to explain this is during her visit. See, she arrives saying she was expecting him. She's the one the world calls the Golden Daughter, Lortel, and Black Alveole of the 2nd act. She's probably trying to gather people who will be useful to her to occupy the Opheles Hall, but this time, he doesn't want to get involved and will simply reject any offer from her. She starts talking to the protagonist anyway, saying she wasn't going to ask him for this favor at the beginning. The protagonist just thinks that as long as he doesn't interfere, everything will go according to plan. But the girl says that if only Toddy hadn't fainted, and he questions why things aren't going according to plan. He asks her why he fainted, asking her to tell him everything that happened. He says that originally Toddy picked a fight with Taylor, but he should have just gotten a beating for Taylor's sake. He talks to the boy, saying that this loser defeated Glaston, not believing it because everyone has already seen him being knocked out by Lucy in one go. And the problem isn't actually what he was saying before, but what he said afterward, saying that he's even worse than that insect Edhoff Taylor. But right after saying that, he received an absurd punch from Jisik, which left him on the ground. And Lortel says she doesn't know if it was because of Taylor or him, and upon hearing this, it was the first time she'd seen Jisik so angry. And she says she simply can't trust emotional people, and there's nothing that difficult for him to do, and he should get the key from Alice and enter the Hall of Children. And when the lower-ranking students gather there, he just needs to open the door. But the protagonist says he's sure there are many people besides him who can do it. But she says that regardless of how much money they receive, there's no guarantee. They won't hand him over to the Academy's internal investigators, because if they say Lortel is behind everything, she questions what will become of her, saying she can't trust just anyone. And so he realizes she sought him out because of his shitty reputation. She mentions that Ed was already expelled from the salon, or his children's academy, asking if he doesn't want to mess with the academy as payback. However, the boy says he really doesn't want to do that, but she asks how about she listened to his conditions, and he thinks he just needs to do his part with moderation. Then she offers 20 gold coins. The protagonist thinks that before the story gets even more distorted, he'll put everything back in place and agrees with her to accept and do it for that price. So, in D1 during the reign, he's reading and thinks that the occupation of the hall or children began before the start of the dispute for the sealed grimoire of the sage. And Lortel's strategy to drive the academy's finances into complete chaos is kind of a faction-leaning episode. According to the plot, Lortel succeeds in this conspiracy and founds Mercantilism, a lucrative group at the academy, thus creating a structure that rivals the Princess Phineas Student Association and the Idealist Student Association, the Student Association, and the Realist Mercantilism. What matters is who Taylor will choose, since that side will be the winner, and he just needs to continue being a spectator and then join the group that seems to be going to win. After all, he also has to survive. Then Janik arrives there in the rain, saying that he needs to go back to the dormitory, saying that the rain would stop today, and he's surprised to see the girl there. And she tells Ed, he says, it's really amazing because she can come and go as she pleases, like a camping trip. But he has to stay there even on rainy days, like that one. And the protagonist says it gets better with time. And the girl says that thinking about it, it's almost time for her to officially leave the children's salon. And the protagonist remembers that yes, since the holidays are almost over, and she says she needs to throw away a lot of things, because the Deck salon was much smaller than she imagined. And she says that speaking of which, if he needs anything he should tell her, because there's a lot he needs. But then he says it's okay, and she says she has pillows, cushions, clocks, extra flashlights, and various other things. Besides that, there are also various supplies and other daily necessities, and she thinks it would be a waste to throw everything away, and it's a lot of work too. And although she can't bring furniture with her because it all belongs to the children's salon, she'll try her best. And the protagonist says he would love to receive that, and the girl, as she happily says she'll leave when the semester starts, and then brings these things. But as for Lucy, the girl asks if she does this often, and the protagonist says that sometimes she does, because the girl is standing on the roof, and the protagonist says that Lucy's extraordinarily strong powers didn't come for free, and she's lived her life running away, using laziness as an excuse, and she's been averting her eyes from her promised destiny for many years, and no matter how many screws were loose, she couldn't help but reflect on her life on rainy days like that, and tells him that she gets like that when it rains, telling him not to pay too much attention to her, and he simply doesn't pay attention to the girl. And Jenica says she understands, noticing that he is indifferent towards Lucy. The protagonist speaks to Jenica because, thinking about it, she is still in the Ophelia's hall, and when the hall is occupied, the protective streets will be activated on a large scale, locking all the students inside their rooms, and Jenica would have no problem escaping from there alone. However, he says he has a favor to ask of her, and she questions what it is, and asks him if tomorrow, around 9 o'clock at night, she could go to the Rose Garden in front of the Ophelia's hall, and the girl is surprised because he is calling. She goes to the Rose Garden and tells him she'll explain why tomorrow, but in her mind, she already has a definite reason. The protagonist thinks to himself that he really can't find the words to explain it to her right now, and he should get her out of there in case something unexpected happens. Go in somewhere not too far away where she can avoid the rain. Then she says it's okay, telling him she's leaving now, and runs off. The protagonist feels more relieved with her leaving and says that around the beginning of the semester, the rain will also stop, and he can finally enjoy the clear, sunny sky of that day after a long time. After that, these woods will have the typical sun of autumn, and he watches the rain fall in his campfire and tells her that the long holidays are also ending now. And so, on day 0 of the Ophelia's Hall incident, 9 o'clock at night, Gesoka's in his room, thinking that he lacks composure, and he should also avoid reacting as emotionally as possible, because he says he didn't expect that. Elka was so angry that he got down from his push-up looked out the window, and noticed the protagonist arriving, completely hooded. He recognized him and asked how many other maids were there. The first maid said that besides the important employees, most were in the meeting room, and the head maid had asked them to meet to discuss an important agenda. He noticed they were planning to block the entrance after meeting there, and that the person in charge had been bribed, so things were moving quickly. The girl said she had also prepared the requested items in advance, and the protagonist thanked her. She said she would just leave them in a corner. He then said that all the preparations were done, and with the occupation of the Opheles Hall about to begin, the chaos was already widespread outside. They said they couldn't take that treatment anymore, telling them to listen to their pleas. And Elaine was shouting in the middle of everyone. Finally, the door opened and they rushed in. Elaine thanks him, saying that he was the one Lortel bribed, Edhoff Taylor, and the protagonist tied up the maid and left her there, telling Elaine that he always agreed with everything he shouted. And of course, he lived well in the Opheles Hall, but only when he was expelled did he deeply realize the special privileges he enjoyed. Elaine ends up thinking he's an idiot because he judged him based on those rumors, and didn't even know he was such a good person, saying he did a lot today. But the protagonist completely denies this, saying that he was the one who managed to organize everything, and that he was the one who created that mess, telling him to go upstairs quickly, telling him to stop crying and go up already, and he says that everything is fine. He says he's going to leave this place to the protagonist, and he says that Elaine is the one who will take the blame for everything, apologizing but telling the boy to stay strong, saying there's no need to stop the maid who's running away. After all the superiors she should report to are inside the meeting room. The head maid Alice, who controls the protection runes, is in Lortel's hands, so she activates those protection runes, and the runes that should protect the students end up becoming the prison that will keep them captive. And they don't understand anything, and so, while they think everything will go back to normal, if they just wait, and the protagonist thinks everything is going according to plan, and the black veil that orchestrated all this arrives beside him, talking to the protagonist, saying that his beginning was much more flashy and extravagant than she expected, but still, that was expected of Eddie, saying it was a good idea to leave it to him. And the protagonist says that the black veil will go up on stage. Loretta arrives saying that even her socks are soaked, explaining why she hates going out in the rain. Well, you have to agree with her. Going out in the rain is awful. He's surprised that she was watching, and she says that the gym staff will quickly reprimand them when they arrive. So, they have to finish things beforehand, and the protagonist tells her to do the best she can. But she talks to Eddie, saying she knows this is unexpected. But she asks if he's ever killed anyone, and the protagonist says no. Then she says that he's not the same, giving a forced smile. But she says she did similar things because she needed to survive, and to survive, she crushed other people's lives. And to avoid being betrayed, she stabbed other people in the back first. And she lived her life forgiving herself for her sins, believing she had no choices. But honestly, she was just making excuses for herself. And that's how Loretta earned the nickname Golden Daughter. And she knows better than anyone that she doesn't deserve any sympathy. And so she ends up seeking it in other people. She talks to Eddie, asking if he can sympathize with someone like her. And it's almost as if she's possessed. Loneliness comes to people, regardless of whether they are good or bad, and to escape it. People have no choice but to seek out people similar to themselves, wallowing in filth and grime. Only after finding someone who will sink into the swamp with them do they find a piece of redemption. The protagonist tells her no, saying that she needs to take responsibility for her decisions. The protagonist says that of course, that person isn't him. The girl then says that she said something useless, that she was different from herself, and that she should do what she's there to do. After all, there isn't much time left. She leaves him behind, and the protagonist feels more at ease, thinking that now Loretta will talk to Alice about their plan from then on. And as soon as they cast the defensive spells of the off hall, they lost their composure, handed the room commander over to Elaine, the leader of the lower students. The story will unfold with the intensification of current events. Then Elaine, enveloped by the dense protection of the off hall's defensive spells, will transform into the boss of the fourth stage. The scenario involves defeating Elaine, who will lose his mind amidst the defensive runes, becoming uncontrollably insane. Now he just needs to sit there and wait for Taylor to arrive, as he only has to do a mediocre job to drag things out for a while and then lose. Taylor will then go up to the second floor and take care of the rest. He may take a few punches in the process of fighting the others, but it's still a necessary sacrifice. Meanwhile, in the Rose Garden, Janica asks why a carriage so late at night, as it seems someone important is arriving, wondering if it's alright if she's there now, thinking that she probably wouldn't know about it yet, because she wants to. He left after giving her that note, and she wondered if he had prepared something special for her. But the golden carriage held no significance for her, and given the context, she wasn't going to leave the Rose Garden Pavilion because, for the past 3 days, she had been deeply thinking about what Eddie wanted to tell her, and she couldn't sleep at night. Because, although she felt guilty, she had been following what Eddie was doing through Marilda, and she discovered that it wasn't just Lucy who visited Eddie's camp, but even Princess Phinia, Belle, Maya, Jigsaw, and even Lortel had been seen leaving, and the coincidence that most of them were female colleagues made it all the more painful for her, and all the spirits were saddened by it, and that's why she would wait for him no matter how long, and she was too in love, but she stopped in the middle of all that rain to wonder if that persimmon flower hair clip was a bad choice, saying that Cosmo would have been prettier, but then she thought that if she could hurry back, everything might be alright, and she would still wait. And after she returned with her new hairpin, of course, and she headed to Jofel's hall. And already in front of the hall, Taylor asks if they are sure about the decision to go in there. And Alvera asks if he knows how much the herbs in her room are worth, but he says that perhaps it would be better to wait for the academy staff to resolve the situation. However, Alvera says that the herbs will lose their properties if she doesn't use preservation magic in time, and asks if she knows how much this small detail influences the results, asking if he can perceive how profound this is. Then she tells Allah, telling her to stop, because she is trying to go in there alone. Then Allah asks if he can't just let it go, because Alvera is the best student in the alchemy college, and she is sure that she can protect herself. But Taylor says that it is not she who is in danger, only those poor students, because if she goes crazy, she will simply attacking them with any chemical they can get their hands on. And he keeps telling Alvera to stop, but she tells him to stop with the sharp talk because she has to go to the 4th floor where her room is, and then Allah asks if she only needs to get to the 4th floor, saying that if she gets there, she won't have anything else to do, and she says of course, because she only needs her herbs to be safe and sound. Then she says that if anyone gets in her way, she will force her way through, and when she opens the door, Ed is in front of them, and he's giving them all a very nasty look. And then Taylor asks why he's there, while Alvera notices that there are footprints of students who have already broken in there, and the display cabinet is a disaster, and Ed is standing there with his back to the stairs, and she finds it interesting, since she wasn't expecting it, asking if he's going to stop them, and the protagonist tells them he's sorry, but they can't go in there, and she finds that amusing, and if she wants, she asks if he's sure he can stop her, since she heard from Jigsaw that her proficiency in magic is quite high. But what good is that? Because he's just an amateur who can only use magic. The protagonist, a mere second-year student, explains that they have a competent swordsman on their side, a much skilled in mid-level first-year magic, and herself, an alchemist with the best skills of her year and a huge power difference. Taylor asks why Adolf Taylor is doing this, demanding he tell him right now what's happening upstairs, but the protagonist remains silent. Taylor lunges at him, saying he feels he has no choice but to force him to speak. However, the protagonist gets up and throws a chair at Taylor, causing him to cut it. Alvera thinks this magic seems like a basic spell, assuming he's a mudge, and will probably target Taylor since he's better at close combat. But she's startled when the protagonist uses his wind blade upwards, cutting a nearby chandelier and throwing it at Taylor, who wasn't expecting it. He needs to run quickly to avoid being hit, while all the students remain trapped in their rooms. And that scaredy cat is questioning what's happening outside. Taylor, after all the mess with the chandelier, asks Ayla if she's okay, and she says she's fine and only fell because of the shock. He then asks Alvera if she's alright, and she tells him not to worry about her, until she looks ahead and doesn't see an attack coming her way. That attack cuts part of her hair, startling the girl. Then she realizes her bag fell along with all her alchemical materials, and she notices he was serious about it, meaning something is really happening upstairs. But when she looks ahead, the protagonist has already disappeared, and she thinks about picking something up from the floor. But then the protagonist simply uses his ignition, sweeping everything with fire near the girl, exploding those flasks. She realizes the battlefield was established so naturally, almost like flowing water, and the edge of Taylor's judgment was quick, and I need it, and she thinks that's not good. Thinking about Jix, saying that he can't keep ignoring the information like that, because the protagonist is a little beyond his high proficiency in magic. I'll tell you, the protagonist is getting very strong. The guy not only knows how to use magic very well, but he's also prepared. And the protagonist is still protecting the staircase, right in front of them, and Elvira thinks that is the best student in the Alchemy Academy. She represents the main forces on her side, and the biggest flaw of the Alchemy Academy is that without relying on magical tools or elixirs, its raw combat power is close to zero. And most of the Academy's students carry a magic ring or necklace, but she always thought that a genius like her wouldn't need that, because she thought it was too boring and laborious. And she doesn't believe that Guy thought of that too, because he made the chandelier fall and used the small opening he managed to create to launch a barrier of fire, all to aim at her bag. But she thinks not, because if that were the case, he would have gone after the bag and not the strap. After all, the guy is that miserable Edhoff Taylor. But the protagonist seems to know very well what he's doing, so she takes a kind of crystal out of her pocket, telling herself that she's not out of options yet, summoning an angelic bunny. And she says she's going to apply a fire-resistant formula, make him furious, and amplify his strength, and that cute little bunny turns into a beast. Ayla is a huge, berserk creature, but meanwhile, she's trying to remember a spell to put out the fire and ends up not remembering anything. While trying to use the spell, she can't even manage it, and the protagonist launches another wind slash at the girl. Taylor steps in front, cutting off the attack and telling Ayla to calm down, but the girl is so scared she's even hyperventilating. He thinks Ayla is confident in her magical theory, but her combat skills, even among first-year students learning basic spells, are at best mediocre. And with the way the protagonist keeps openly targeting her, he can't even get close to him. Or rather, he and Ayla can't even move or hear each other. Taylor asks if he thinks he can finish him off if he gets closer, then orders him to launch his rabbit at the protagonist. The rabbit starts buying time for Taylor, and he says it doesn't matter if he thinks he can do it, he has to do it, and Elvira says that. This is great, and she likes it, rushing towards the fire, using her coat as protection. And she passes through the fire, and she's surprised by it, and the girl passing by here. He finally picks up his potions, asking if they missed him, saying that their time apart wasn't long. But she missed them a lot, and the protagonist throws his wind magic at the girl while fighting with that rabbit, trying to hit Elvira, using the wind blade towards her, and she thinks he seems to have a lot of preparation. However, she applies the release magic, throwing her flask, and she says it's too late. And the protagonist attack opens that flask, breaking it. And she says that a chemical reagent prepared by cutting night butterfly flowers and billheads, mushrooms, while launched with the release magic, becomes a special chemical reagent. And it works by controlling the release magic, and everything there starts to fade, and all the magic is undone, and even the fire is undone. And she says that he temporarily subdues the products resulting from the magic formulas, while the protagonist kills that rabbit, and she says that he should know what this means. And he throws the rabbit on the ground and just waits for his next attack. And Elvira wants to know if the wizard who doesn't know how to use magic knows what to do. And she starts saying that he's pretending as if everything is alright because they have a warrior on their side, and tells Taylor that this is his chance, and the boy lunges at Eddie, but ends up noticing that he's running away. So Eddie takes the opportunity to knock down a cabinet in front of the boy, blocking his way. Then he spills some kind of oil, and that oil spreads around and catches fire, and that's how they smell it. And Taylor realizes it's flammable oil, and Elvira asks if he's crazy because they are in the lawfulest hall, and if he starts a fire there, many people will die. But Taylor says that whether it's fire created by magic or oil, he can cut through anything with his elemental slash. And the chemical reagent doesn't last more than a few minutes anyway, and before anyone gets hurt, he'll put an end to it. But then Elvira calls Taylor asking him to wait, because the window is open enough for all the smoke to escape. She could escape, and even the carpet that could catch fire isn't there. And there aren't any flammable objects either. And she wonders if Eddie Taylor thought so far ahead and planned it. While Taylor attacks the protagonist, Elvira yells at him not to do it, and the protagonist aims his arrow at the boy. He's surprised that Taylor is using a bow, saying he'll parry it. But then Elvira realizes the attack isn't aimed at them, and Taylor also sees that it wasn't targeting him. The attack passes by them and heads towards Ayla, who is still preparing her spell. He thinks Ayla can't even use magic spells now, so Elvira uses her magic to stop the attack, catching the arrow with one of her items. She says that was a close call and stops the arrow using her claw hand, a magical engineering tool that can attract any small object in sight, even from a long distance. Seeing this, she wonders what's wrong with the arrow since he covered the tip with the cloth. Questioning if his plan was to hurt her, she tells Taylor to wait, telling him to be careful because he's sure to have another trick up his sleeve. But then Taylor goes after the protagonist and touches his sword to his bow. Eddie, hearing the noise, realizes it's time. Taylor says they'll all die if they don't do anything now, and the protagonist talks about Act 2. The final chapter, the Orpheles Hall incident, and the second floor boss is the melancholic Clebius Norton Daly. He escapes from his room, and the protagonist thinks his work is finally done, letting himself be hit and knocked out by Taylor. Elvira is surprised, asking what Eddie's problem is, and they all rush at him, asking if he's gone mad. Taylor says there must be a reason he went so far. Elvira says she feels like vomiting because she feels he's been toying with them throughout the fight. If he really wanted to dominate them, he wouldn't have shown himself and attacked them after the chandelier fell on them. Yet he still remained right there in front of them to stop them, and even during the fight, he didn't relax for a moment. And she starts to think something strange is going on. The protagonist asks Taylor if he's finished, and Taylor lets him go. He says that if he's done, he should go upstairs now and stop barking at him. Taylor doesn't understand anything because he stopped them for so long. So why is he just letting them go now? But then the noise upstairs intensifies, and Elvira asks Eddie why he let them win. Ayla asked what Elvira means by that, and Taylor asks if he went easy on them, especially that guy. She says she won't leave without knowing why, demanding demanding he answer why he let them win. But the protagonist just keeps staring intently into her eyes, and she gets increasingly irritated. Meanwhile, Janek arrives there with her persimmon flower brooch, a choice she made after thinking about it all night without rest. She wonders if someone could humiliate her pure love, calling her naive. It may have been delusional, but imagining happy thoughts depends on a person's freedom. However, the difference between imagination and reality can sometimes be cruel. The boy she thought would be in the pavilion, all dressed up, was on the floor covered in blood after being attacked by a group of suspicious people. She asked them all what they did, already invoking her Yander mode. My friends, run, run, because this idea is completely crazy, and besides being crazy, it's very strong. Until you explain that a pig's nose isn't an electrical outlet, you're going to get a lot of flack. And if you want a continuation, don't forget to leave a like and comment below. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll definitely see you in the next video. Bye.